Welcome to another episode of A Boring Story to help you fall asleep. Tonight, we will wander through towns and castles, from kitchen to armory. Adjust your volume and settle in. At the far edge of the market quarter, where the cobbles give way to packed earth and sheds lean together like old neighbours, stands the potter's yard. It is a place of clay and quiet fire, of slow shaping hands and heat that turns earth to something lasting. A low wall encloses the yard, and over its gate hangs a sign carved with a simple jug. Inside, the smell is a mix of damp earth, wood smoke, and the faint metallic tang of cooling glaze. Before dawn, the potter, Marcelin, wakes. He is a broad-shouldered man with arms shaped by years of wedging clay and hefting jugs. His clothes are plain, patched with clay stains that will never wash out. He crosses the yard in boots whitened by dried slip, lantern swinging in one hand. The kiln still breathes faint warmth from yesterday's firing. A soft red glow winks in the cracks. Marcelin smiles, another good night's burn. Clay is the first business and the last. Along the back wall lie shallow settling pits lined with puddled clay. Yesterday's river mud rests here, the heavier grit sunk, the fine cream floating over it like milk. Marcelin pulls the gate plug and lets the top liquor run into a trough, then lifts it with a ladle into wicker-lined baskets to drain. What remains will be smooth and even, stubborn stones left behind. He folds in a pinch of grog, ground up shards from past broken pots, to lend strength against the kiln's heat, and sometimes a little sand for temper if the season is damp. He begins by turning the wheel where unfinished bowls dried overnight to leather hard. Each piece is lifted gently, checked for cracks, and set on boards in the morning air. The clay smells cool and clean, damp as a riverbank. He hums while he works, a tune as slow as the wheels spin. From a covered pit he digs fresh clay, heavy and cold, and wedges it on a low table, folding and pressing until it is smooth and free of bubbles, rhythm and old prayer in his arms. The workshop is simple but orderly. A long bench holds tools, ribs of wood and bone, wire cutters, small knives, a comb for sgraffito, a roulette wheel that prints tiny linked circles, a sponge dark with use. Shelves climb the walls, lined with jugs, mugs, pipkins, and platters in various stages. Some soft and pale, some dry and chalky, some already glazed with colours dulled until fire wakes them. Against one wall squats the great updraft kiln, built of brick and clay, its arched mouth dark for now but still whispering heat. Beside it, a smaller biscuit kiln for the first, lower firing. As dawn brightens, Marcelin's apprentice arrives. Young Etienne, sleepy-eyed but eager. He carries a basket of kindling and a bundle of alder sticks for the kiln and greets his master with a grin. Marcelin points him to the wheel. The boy begins to centre a lump of clay, elbows tucked, hands clumsy at first but improving under the patient gaze of his teacher. The kickwheel hums, the clay rises, and a simple cup begins to take shape, a thumb leaving a small proud dimple at the base. Marcelin sits at his own wheel, his hands ashore, coaxing a tall jug from a heavy mound. Water slicks the clay, gleaming in morning light. With each gentle pull the form lifts, base widening, shoulder rounding, neck narrowing, lip flaring. He collars the neck with careful fingers, draws a beak for pouring with a pinch and press. He speaks softly to Etienne about pressure and balance, about listening to the clay as much as commanding it, how a wobble means too much water, how a hiss under the rib means the wall is right. The boy nods, though most of his understanding comes through the slow apprenticeship of watching and trying. When a shape pleases him, Marcelin wires it free from the wheel and sets it on a bat to firm. Handles must wait until the clay will hold them. He pulls a coil of clay into a ribbon, the length smooth as leather, and lays it at a damp cloth until the jugs are ready to take their ears. Later he will score and slip, press and lift with the heel of his hand, so the join is one flesh and not two. Between pieces he checks yesterday's glaze tests. Small witness tiles dipped in varying mixtures of ash, copper, lead and iron, now cooled from the kiln. One shimmers olive where the ash ran sweet, another shows brown freckles where iron bloomed. He rubs a thumbnail over a tin-whitened spot, good and opaque, fit for painting a saint's blue robe if the friary keeps its promise of more cobalt. By mid-morning the yard comes alive with small visitors. A neighbour brings warm bread in thanks for a mended water jar. A passing merchant stops to order stout mugs for his crew, and 2 narrow-neck costrels for travel ale. Marcelin greets them kindly but keeps his hands working. He measures capacity by eye, sketches a quick jug mark with a wet finger, promises the merchant a set before harvest. The wheel turns on, steady as breath, cutting quiet rings into the day. Etienne, meanwhile, learns the craft's lesser glories. He carries yesterday's dry bowls to the trimming bench, where Marcelin shows how to invert and true the foot. The shavings curl away like pale peel. The boy practices stabbing a vent hole in pipkin lids so steam could find its road. He listens to talk of firing. Pots must be dry as bone before they face the kiln. Stack them so flame licks every side. Draw a test sherd from the spy hole with an iron hook to read the melt by eye, not by stubborn hope. The yard does more than tableware. Tiles dry along a rack, floor squares impressed with a simple leaf, and curved roof tiles with thumbed ends that will hook like fish over laths. A friar from the priory has ordered a line of small painted roundels, lambs and lilies to set in a chapel floor. Marcelin has made a wooden stamp for the lamb, its wool suggested by tiny punched circles. After glazing, the figure will stand proud as if wet with mourning. As noon nears, they break to eat bread, a curl of cheese, and a pear beneath the shade of a fig tree in the yard's corner. The tree is old and twisted, planted by Marcelin's father, and offers quiet refuge from clay and heat. They talk little. The work itself fills the mind. Birds hop close for crumbs. A breeze stirs the hanging boards of drying bowls, setting a soft clatter like distant chimes, and flips the corner of the tally slate where orders are chalked. After eating, they begin to load the biscuit kiln. This is a craft of patience and geometry. Marcelin crouches to place each piece. Bowls nested but not touching, jugs turned so their handles face the gentler draught, larger platters set on edge, with 3 daubs of clay giving them feet. Etienne passes him the ware one by one, careful as if handing eggs. Between layers, Marcelin sets kiln furniture, stilts and little spurs, to keep glazes from kissing shelves in later firings. For now, simple biscuit will cure the clay. Then the mouth is bricked shut with loose wickets and damp clay smoothed along the seams. Etienne coaxes the fire awake with withies and chips, then oak billets as the heat builds. The kiln breathes and grows, brick by brick warming to a ruddy glow. Marcelin watches the fire's colour and smoke, opening the stoke holes a finger's breadth, closing the back damper to pull flame deeper, teaching the boy how to listen for the low, even roar that means the climb is true. There is no rushing this. The firing will last into evening. While the biscuit climbs, other work continues. Marcelin returns to his wheel, his hands finding the day's pace again. He makes 6 tigres, 3-handled drinking cups for festival sharing, each handle pulled and thumbed in one breath so they seem to grow from the body. Etienne mixes slips in bowls, white from levigated clay, red from iron-rich wash, and a greenish ash lime that will fall to olive where it thickens. He practices trailing a thin thread of slip over a mug's belly, drawing a quick vine with a bird perched, beak open to sing. Glazes wait in lidded tubs. Lead flux sits there dull, the colour of ash, but in the kiln it will turn glass and shine. For greens, a dusting of verdigris or crushed green copper scale. For browns, iron scraped from the smith's hearthstones. For deep smoke mottling, Nothing but wood ash and the luck of flame. Tin for a white that hides all if purse allows, manganese for a soft purple line. Each is a promise and a hazard. Too much lead and a cup sings danger. Too little and the glaze crawls like scorched milk. Customers return in afternoon light. A farmer needs a buttercrock with a water seal lip. A young couple wants a simple jug for wedding wine, with a daisy stamped at the shoulder. A drover orders wide-mouthed jars for salt meat. Marcelin listens, measures with his hands, promises. Some barter with eggs, some with coin, some with a day's wood for the kiln, some with a roof tile repaired on the potter's own house. The yard is part shop, part meeting place. News flows with trade. Someone mentions a good harvest of barley, someone else a coming saint's day. A mason says the new gate tower will need rainspouts, dog's heads if the potter can manage them. The biscuit kiln eases toward its soak. Marcelin draws a trial shard on an iron hook. It cools to chalk and rings when tapped, good and cooked. They let the fire fall and brick the larger glaze kiln open, the more of it like a cave's mouth. Now comes the careful packing. Glazed pots must sit on stilts or cakes of clay, lip to lip or foot to shelf, each with space enough to swell and not kiss a neighbour. Saggers, lidded clay boxes, protect finer wear from ash if a customer's taste or purse asks for cleaner surfaces. Etienne tends the woodpile, learning the rhythm. Steady feeding keeps heat even. Sudden gust and overeager arm can twist a jug's neck where it thins. Marcelin explains how the temperature must climb and then hold, how the flame must be made to sweep the chamber so no corner sulks cold. How to read the colour through the spy-hole, black, then red, then cherry, then the living orange where glaze begins to move. The boy's face shines with sweat and pride. This is knowledge passed more by doing than by words. Dangers go with it. A sealed jug can burst like a curse if a few drops hide in its belly. A bowl too thick at the base will crack, with a sound like the yard's fig tree splitting in frost. Marcelin keeps a charm nailed by the kiln door, a small clay cock his father made, and crosses himself without fuss when the first real heat come on. Faith and habit ride the same cart. Night deepens, stars wheel over the yard, and the kiln grows fierce, alive as a great beast. Flame licks at the crown vents, the potter closes them to soak the heat. He draws a witness tile with iron tongs, blows it, and sees the glaze's skin wrinkling and then smoothing, glassy as breath leaves it. He nods, satisfied. Keep it here, no higher. Neighbours drift by, drawn by the glow. A cobbler brings ale and stays to watch a while, swapping gossip. A baker's wife arrives with sweet rolls for the long night. Children peer through the fence, marvelling at the dragon breath of flame and the sparks that lift like tiny stars. A watchman, off duty, stands warming his hands and tells of foxes by the bridge. The yard becomes a little festival of its own, quiet but companionable, with the kiln's low thunder for drum. Between stokes there is time for craft talk. Marcelin tells Etienne of clay veins in the hills, the blue-grey seam that throws well and the red seam that loves tiles. He speaks of glazes that surprise, of a copper that went black when the wind turned and pulled too much smoke across it, and of a jug that collapsed in tears because the handle was set on before the shoulder could bear it. Failure is a strict but honest master. It gives back lessons the kiln will ask for again. When the firing reaches its peak, Marcelin closes vents and lets the heat soak deep. He knows by feel and by sight when enough has been done. He sets the main stokehole clay tight and listens as the beast sighs down from a roar to a steady breath. The long wait begins. The kiln must cool slowly, sometimes a day and a night, before it can be opened. Too quick, and glazes craze like the first skin of ice on a trough. Too slow, and the day's orders slip behind the week's. They sit together on low stools, watching sparks climb into the dark, the fig leaves turning their pale bellies to the night breeze. Etienne nods with weariness but pride. Marcelin smiles and lets him doze, cloak pulled around his small shoulders. The master keeps watch, listening to the kiln's settling ticks, the gentle night sounds beyond the wall, an owl, a distant dog, the river's hush. This is a potter's vigil, neither lonely nor hurried. At grey light they bank the last coals and sleep on cots near the clay bench. The room smells of earth and smoke and work well done. Marcelin writes a few notes in his ledger. Clay from the south pit, 2 carts of alder from Rule, ash glaze on set B to test, then sets his quill aside. Morning brings the joy and the judgment. They unseal the wicket brick by careful brick, letting a draught of cool air nose in. Warm breath washes their faces. Inside, rows of pots glimmer, colours woken, greens like riverweed where copper ran sweet, browns like baked crust where ash kissed the shoulder, milky whites where tin lay thick, smoke freckles where flame played. They lift each piece into light, tipping it to hear the ring. A cracked bowl gets set aside with a quiet sigh. A jug with a perfect run of green at its lip earns a grin so wide it feels like summer. Pieces meant for use are tested. A pipkin meets the hearth's edge to prove it will not spit. A water jar is rubbed with a wet thumb to see if it sweats. A roof tile is tapped and listened to, clear means sound, dull means a flaw inside. Etienne carries cooling ware to the shop table, where customers will come, chalks a little daisy on the underside of the wedding jug beside Marcelin's mark, and wraps 2 small bowls in torn cloth for the neighbour who brought bread. Work does not end with firing. A scribe from the guild hall steps in to note orders filled, tiles for the guild latrine roof, no glory in it, but steady coin, jars for the apothecary, pitchers for the alehouse, a pair of aquamanile beasts for the lord's kitchen if clay will take the strain of their strange shapes. The beadles glance over the lead barrel and the ash pile. The yard must not poison the stream nor burn the quarter. Marcelin answers with patience. He keeps his ash dry and his water pits covered with reed mats. Seasons rule the craft. Summer dries clay too fast, rims crack unless shaded and turned. Winter keeps pots damp forever. A fire made in haste will sacrifice a week's work to steam. In spring, clay digs easy, but the yard becomes a slip of mud. In autumn, the alder stacks high and smoke hangs sweet, and the kiln is kind. Festivals bring extra orders, painted lamps for All Souls, tigers and whistles shaped like birds for the fair, small pilgrim flasks stamped with a saint's badge for those bound to shrines. Not all is work. Etienne sneaks a toy whistle onto the shelf, pinched like a fat fish, and blushes when his master finds it. Marcelin only chuckles and shows him where to pierce the fipple true so it will sing and not wheeze. On winter nights, when the kiln warms the yard and snow muffles the town, he tells the boy stories of the first pot he threw that didn't collapse, of the time a fox stole a cooling tile for its den, of his father's thumbprint he still finds now and then on old shard piles and feels as if a hand had touched his shoulder. Trade ties the yard to the town. The brewer brings a jug of ale and takes away a dozen mugs. The cooper swaps a barrel stave for a pipkin. The smith provides iron hooks and receives in return a glazed jar for his wife's salt. Money is scarce. Trust runs richer. The widow down the lane pays with a skein of wool. The reeve counts tiles and reminds Marceline, with a face that tries not to smile, that the Lord's tithe is due in roof work rather than coin this year. Hazards shadow the work. Lead fumes bite the throat. Marcelin keeps the glossed kiln's draught high and drinks milk by old wisdom, whether it helps or not. The kickwheel gnaws at the knee. He changes his stance when pain nags. The kiln can take a sleeve if a man leans foolishly. Etienne's hair is kept short by stern instruction and a ready pair of shears. Shards cut, hands are nicked and scarred, beeswax and linen stand ready, yet the craft pays back. Warm bread kept soft under a tight-lidded crock, rain singing harmless or a sound tile roof, a jug that pours smooth as a promise. By afternoon the yard is a market of its own. Townswomen test jars with their knuckles, listening children beg for the bird whistles. A miller orders flour bins with tight lids against mice. A physician, frowning at the sky, demands glazed urinals shaped like pears. Marceline writes names in chalk, measures with a string, takes coin, takes eggs, takes a promise written on the face of a neighbour he has known since boyhood. When shadows climb the wall, they sweep and set the boards of drying ware under cover, close the clay pits against cats and rain, and stack the last billets tidy so they will season before next burn. Marceline wipes his hands on an old apron until the clay loses its hold, then washes in a basin where the water turns the colour of milk and earth. Etienne scrubs the trimming bench, lays tools in their places, and pins his whistle toy to a beam to remind himself there is play in the work if one keeps the rules. At dusk, they carry a jug and 2 mugs to the threshold and sit. The kiln is only warm now, the fig tree rattles its leaves. Somewhere beyond the wall the bellman finds the rope for vespers. Smoke from supper hearths drifts low. The river answers the day with a slow shining. Marceline drinks and feels the familiar ache of a day well spent. His eyes travel over shelves and walls as if counting sheep. Bowls, jugs, tiles, pipkins, tigers, earth given shape and use. Night settles. The yard holds its own small stars, a coal breathing in the ash, the glimmer on a green glazed lip, a moth's powdery flicker near the door. Marceline bars the kiln shed, covers the slip tubs, and hangs the ledger book from a peg high from damp. Etienne yawns so wide his eyes water. Before sleep, Marceline sets his palm on the kiln's warm flank. He thanks it without words. He thanks the tree for shade. He thanks the clay that has not yet spoken, and the clay that failed but taught. In the dark workshop, cots creak, and breath evens. Outside, the yard smells of earth and ash, and a sweetness like baked crust. Morning will come with new clay to wedge, new rims to turn, new glazes to test, and, if fortune smiles, no cracks in what cooled tonight. The town will wake hungry for vessels, and the potter's yard will answer with forms that fit the hand and the day. Fire and earth, guided by patient hands, will outlast the night. On a side street just off the bustling market square stands the Stag and Willow, an alehouse known for its sturdy oak beams and the warmth of its hearth. By day it fills with merchants and townsfolk taking bread and beer. By night it glows with talk and song. Beneath it, though, lies a quieter world. The Alehouse Cellar, cool and earthen, where barrels sleep and brewing secrets live in the dark. At first light, before any guest comes knocking, the alewife Marthe pushes open the heavy trapdoor behind the bar. A breath of cool, damp air greets her, carrying scents of yeast, oak, and deep soil. She takes the narrow stair, lantern in one hand, skirts tucked clear. Her boots find each stone step by memory. She has walked this way since she was a girl, first helping her father, now mistress of the house herself. The cellar spreads low and wide under the building, its walls brick and fieldstone, its floor hard-packed earth strewn with clean sand. Barrels stand in ranked rows like squat, patient sentries. Some are banded with bright new iron, others dark with age and seeped stains where ale once wept out and dried. Against one wall sits the mash tun, a great round vat hooped like a ship's hull, and beside it a row of copper kettles for boiling the sweet wort. A shallow coolship broad and low rests on trestles for quick cooling in summer. Ropes of drying herbs, hop, yarrow, rosemary, sweet gale, hang from beams blackened by years of steam. Marthe sets her lantern on a hook and walks her morning circuit. She listens first, knuckling each cask and setting her ear to the wood for the right hollow answer. A good cask sings deep and sure, like a drum with a secret. If one sounds dull, she chalks a little cross on the head for checking. Her palm slides the curve of the staves, feeling for weeps. Her nose tells her more than any measure. Clean bred sweetness means health. Sharp rind or cider sourness means a beer, slipping toward mischief. At the far end stands her apprentice, young Robin, still rubbing sleep from his eyes. He has come early to learn the brewer's craft before the day's bustle begins. Marth nods toward the barrels needing topping. Together they climb a low stool to fill them from a copper receiver, working a hand pump that sighs and gurgles as amber liquid flows. The scent rises warm and bready, edged with the green bitter of last autumn's hops. Robin watches the meniscus swell in the bunghole, learning to stop just short. Ale needs a finger of headspace to breathe, or it will lift the bung with a pop and bathe the floor for the cat's delight. Once the topping is done, they draw samples with a slender wooden thief, a tube plunged into the cask and lifted full. Marth tilts the first draught to the lantern, seeking clarity. Fine haze means youth, bright polish means settled. She wets her lip, lets the beer ride her tongue, considers. Balance is a little sermon. Malt's honey, hops bite, the faint apple of a lively ferment. Robin tastes, sputters at the bitterness, tries again, and finds the bread beneath. Marth's mouth twitches. She remembers her own first honest swallow. This morning the mash tun waits. A festival is near, and strong ale will be wanted to crown it. Marth has already weighed the grist. 2 sacks barley malt, 1 of wheat for soft body, a scoop of roasted malt for colour. She warms the strike water and stirs the grist in with a long mash stick, breaking no clumps. Steam gathers low under the beams. The air turns sweet and thick. Robin fetches herbs, a basket of last year's hops, papery and resinous, a twist of rosemary for a house note the stag and willow is known by, 3 heads of yarrow for a nod to old Gruit ways. Not too much, Marth says. We brew ale, not medicine. They rest the mash under a linen cover. Time here is read by hand and ear. No sandglass rules the sugars. Marth dips a spoon, cools a drop on her wrist, smears it between finger and thumb. Sweet, she says. The grain has opened. Robin pulls the plug and watches first runnings shine like copper into the underback. He sparks the fire beneath the copper kettle, feeding it oak billets slow and even. Marth ladles the sweet wort across, then orders more hot water for the sparge to coax the last sugars from the mash bed, careful what to scour it thin and tannic. Now the boil. The copper seethes, foam rises in a crown. Robin skims with a flat spoon to keep it from boiling over. Marth casts in hops by handfuls. Bittering charge early, the fragrance late. The room turns to fog, malt sweet and green bitter, a scent like warm bread in a meadow. She adds a pinch of ground coriander to 1 kettle for a small cask she keeps for pilgrims who favour it, and a jug of strong wort set aside to fortify the festival barrel. Watch the boil, she says. It's the boil that saves us. Drives off what spoil, seals what keeps. When the rolling calms and the hour's turn is done, they draw the bright wort to cool. In winter the cellar takes the heat greedily, stone drinking it. In summer, Marth spills the stream through the shallow cool ship lined with scrubbed river stones to quicken the chill. She tests with a bare finger to the first joint. Numbers are for clerks, temperature belongs to the skin. When the wort is right, they let it fall into clean casks where yeast waits. The yeast is house treasure, kept like a tame thing. A glazed crock on the cool shelf holds last brew's balm, thick and pale. Each week Marth feeds it with a ladle of fresh wort and skims the lively froth to dry on reed mats for a store against bad weather. Robin peers in as she stirs a starter into the first warm barrel. Within moments, the surface twitches and breathes. "Hear that?" she says. He tilts his head, a subtle hiss, a cellar's lullaby. Fermentation begins almost at once. A whitecap blooms, smelling of bread and ripe apple skins. Marth sets loose lids over the bungholes, wedges them with reeds so air to escape. "A beer must sing before it sleeps," she says. She shows Robin how to skim brown froth if it turns rank, how to smell for green banana that means a hot ferment, how to cool a cask by laying wet cloths over its shoulders. Brewing is as much watching as doing. Mid-morning brings a cooper, hips against a rolling cask, mallet under his belt. His hands carry the reek of pine pitch and smoke. He and Marth trade gossip. The bridge ferrule cracked in last night's frost. Iron bands cost dear this year. He checks the staves she set aside for repair, replacing a loose hoop with 3 precise blows. Robin stands close, learning how wood tightens when it drinks, and how a hoop can be spoken to without splintering pride or oak. Marth hands the cooper a mug from yesterday's strong. He drinks with a craftsman's nod and leaves his chalk mark or a repaired head. Soon the first tavern boy clatters down with clumsy feet and 2 earthen jugs. He fumbles his tally. Marth fixes it with a tap of chalk and a look sharper than hops. "Mind the lip," she says, "and keep the stopper clean." Dust turns a mouth. He steals a glance at the festival cask, already banded with green ribbon, and clambers back gap to the hush of the sleeping hall. Robin follows with a smaller jug, careful as a cat on a fence. By noon the cellar warms from fire and bodies, though its stones keep a blessed cool. They sit a moment on a low bench, bread, a heel of cheese, and small beer poured bright. The fermenting casks talk to them in blips and sighs. Robin asks of Marth's first brew alone. She tells him of summer lightning that soured a cask no prayer could save, of broom scrubbing wood till the nails shone, of learning to scold every tool and never trust a clean-looking stave. Allah forgives much, she says, but not pride. After the meal comes the great truth of all brewing, cleaning. The mash tun is sluiced with boiling water and scrubbed with fresh heather bisms until it smells like rain in cut hay. The coppers are scoured with sand and a twist of cloth until they burnish like autumn sun. Robin curses under his breath when scalds nip his fingers, then grins when Martha dips his hand in cool ale and declares him christened to the trade. Floors are swept, spent grain scooped to a trough for the drover who pays in straw for stools. The cellar's breath sharpens, earthy but orderly. Afternoon draws faces. A wool merchant seeks a barrel for a wedding feast. Marth draws him a beaker of her bright middle ale. He sips and squints at price. She waits. Trade settles with a handshake, 2 coins, and a promise to bring a bolt of broadcloth to mend the bench cushion his men have worn threadbare. 2 pilgrims in dusty hoods ask for small beer for the road. She fills their flasks and tucks in a crust, bids them remember the saint and not spill. A midwife slips down for a jug warmed with spices. She has a birth tonight and swears by hot posset for courage. Not all callers come with purses. The ale taster town ale conner presents himself with solemn belly and official stick. He tastes from the measure, checks the mark on Martha's quart with a brass gauge, and nods that strength and size are sound under the assize of ale. Martha keeps her face unreadable while he pronounces. When he's gone, she writes a neat line in her ledger. Assize satisfied, no fine. Robin learns that an honest measure is worth more than arguing with the Eadle. As daylight leans west, the hall above stirs. Chairs scrape, the spit turns, a lute is tuned. Smells drift down onions, softened in dripping, bread split for trenchers, stew lifting its lid. Marth smiles, since all this will want washing down. She and Robin tap 2 ready casks for the evening trade. He sets each on a stillage, low wedge to tilt the beer to its tap, and she drives the spigot with a measured blow of the mallet. They test. Amber streams steady into mugs, a bead of foam clinging and falling. Clarity is good, taste is clean. The house will be cheerful. The first rush slaps like rain. Tavern boys sprint, jugs rattling, and the chalkboard tally grows a white hedge of marks. Robin learns to hear a cask emptying by its cough. Marthe swaps taps before the last gasper drag yeast into mugs. She teaches him to rest a cask after set down, let the lees settle, or else the beer will pour cloudy and tongues will wag. Between jugs she skims the fermenting caps, whispering a brewer's unowned prayers, habits older than hops. Now and then mischief tests them. A bung lifts with a soft pop and a hiss. Marthe's hand is already there, with a clean reed spile to vent and a weighted stone to keep it meek. A mouse nose-prints the sand near the grain sacks. The cellar cat, old Bran, flows from shadow and turns trespass to lesson. A slow, sour edge teases one cask. Marthe blends its sweetness into a sharper beer destined for mulled ale with cloves and cinnamon, saving both and fooling neither palate nor purse. Between rushes she racks beer for storage. A hose from full cask to clean, the flow kept smooth, the headspace set right. Robin pumps, she guides, both moving as if they'd always done it, which in teen they will have. She shows him finings, clear jelly from fish bladder the rivermen sell, to drop the heavier yeasts in stubborn casks before feast days when every mug must shine. Not too much, she warns, else you strip the life. Sometimes a guest strays down bowled, lost, or clumsy with drink. Marthe meets them with a mug and a glance that brooks no argument, shepherding them back to warmth and song. The cellar is no place for wandering feet. A slip here could spill a week's work. Robin watches and learns that kindness with iron in it is a brewer's second-best tool after hot water. Toward deep evening the songs above weave through the beams, ballads rough and tender, a prayer tucked between verses when a sailor toasts the dead. Heat fades from the coppers, the new batch chats softly to itself, far from done but sure-footed. Marthe writes lines in her ledger by horn lantern, grains, herbs, wood owed, coin taken, jugs broken too, both by the same boy. She marks a small cross beside the festival barrel. Blend with strong, tap on Saint's Eves. Rain begins, a silver whisper on the street grating. The cellar turns close and snug. Robin racks the mash paddles on their pegs, scrubs the thief and the skimmers, lays spigots to dry on clean cloth. He winds the winch rope tidy and sweeps the sand smooth so footprints show clear in morning. Marthe tests one last cask, eyes closed as the ale touches mouth, the way a harpist touches a string. She nods, satisfied. The house will drink well tomorrow. When the final chairs scrape and the last jest falls flat with sleep, the boys bring empties down with muted groans. Marthe hammers bungs home, wedges taps with cloth to keep them sweet, and covers the fermenting barrels with linen against night flies. She and Robin stand a heartbeat with lanterns low, breathing the cellar's layered scents, baked grain, green hop, oak heart, the clean hint of scalded copper. It smells like work and winter kept at bay. She climbs to settle accounts, and Robin lingers to straighten. He stacks mugs, mends a frayed braid of herbs, feeds Bran a respectful pinch of meat. When Marthe returns, she presses a small coin into his palm and, rarer than coin, says, "Good." He pockets both with a grin that will carry him past many scolds. They lower the trapdoor at last. Above, the stag and willow exhales spilled beer and roast and the ember glow of a long day's talk. Below, the cellar rests, cool and alive. The strong sings to itself, the small dreams of morning. Barrels stand like silent guests waiting their turn at the feast of life. Tools hang in a neat parish of their own. The fire is out, and the yeast works on unseen. Marthe steps into the lane with Robin trailing, the night smelling of wet stone and a last echo of song. Stars hitch above rooflines, the bell tower keeps its counsel. "Tomorrow again," she says, which is half promise, half prayer. Grain to mash, fires to tend, barrels to fill, measures to keep honest, thirsty stories to be slaked. In the dark beneath, the alehouse keeps a second heartbeat, a slow, patient thrum of ferment and wood. The cellar waits without hurry, holding the work that will laughter the hall and soften the hard edges of the day. It is the cool, faithful heart under the stag and willow's warm throat, and by its rhythm the house lives. Tucked near the river where water runs steady and clean, the town bathhouse keeps a warm heart through every season. From outside it looks plain, a long timber hall with a low roof vented to let steam escape in soft plumes. Yet as one draws near, the scent of hot water and herbs drifts out to meet the street, and a quiet murmur of voices joins the river's song. Here townsfolk come to wash away dust and weariness, to share small talk, and to find a little warmth when days grow cold. At first light, Mistress Heloise, keeper of the bath, unbars the wide oak door. She is brisk and practical, with a linen kerchief over her hair and arms bare to the elbow. Her husband is already outside drawing water with the help of a mule and a great wheel. Buckets rise glistening from the river and pour into troughs that feed the stone-heated cauldrons. Steam begins to curl upward as fires are coaxed to life beneath the copper kettles. Inside, the bathhouse smells of wood smoke, soap, wet wool, and damp timber. The main room is long, with benches along the walls and a series of shallow tubs set on raised planks. Smaller screened alcoves line one side for those who want privacy. The rest is open, cheerful space. Light slips through latticed windows and dances on the haze of early steam. Near the hearth squats the stove-brick-lunged, black-iron-mouthed feeding heat to copper boilers and a stone cistern that keeps a reservoir just shy of boil. A large brazier sits in the centre, glowing as it warms the air. Heatherwise begins her work. She scrubs the tubs with stiff brooms and lye soap, sluices them with clean water, then scatters herbs into each rosemary, meadowsweet and thyme to sweeten the water and soothe skin. She sets out bundles of clean linen cloths for drying, hung on pegs within reach. Wooden stools are placed near each tub, and a row of sandals stands ready for bare feet to slip into. Bath hats, felted cones to keep heads cool, hang beside the pegs for those who like a long soak. Her husband stirs the cauldrons, testing heat with a long paddle and an eye that can read temperature by the first lazy bubble. They work wordlessly, a dance practiced by years of mornings. Behind a half door lies the warm room, a dimmer chamber with benches and a low stone basin where steam is thick and breath slows. Pots of juniper, mint and lavender simmer on small grates, their scents rising like prayer. Farther still, a little cold room keeps a trough of river water for bracing rinses. In winter it smokes like a dragon's breath when a laughing fool dunks head to toes. Soon the first visitors arrive, an elderly cooper with aching knees, a midwife weary from a night's delivery, 2 miller's boys splashed with flour. They greet Heloise warmly and pay their coins, some in copper, some in bread or a promise of kindling, before setting cloaks on pegs. One by one they step into the steam-filled room, sighing as heat and scent embrace them. The cooper eases himself into a tub with a groan that melts into relief. The midwife wraps her hair in a cloth and settles gratefully, closing her eyes. Etiquette is old here and lightly worn. Men and women keep to separate hours except on feast eves when families may come together under stricter watch. Modesty shifts. Long linen chemises are folded in a basket for those who want them. Others bathe in shirt and braise. Loud talk and rough jest are frowned on. Above the doorway a board is painted with simple rules in a clerk's neat hand. No brawling, no washing of linens on a crowded day, no knives drawn, soap to be returned to the shelf, the water is for all. The bathhouse hums quietly as more arrive. A baker's wife with flour on her sleeves, a journeyman tanner still faintly smelling of hides, a pair of travelling merchants glad for a proper wash. There is laughter but gentle, muted by steam. Voices rise and fall with the splash of water. Some talk of weather and market prices, of wool tallies and river tolls. Others simply rest, eyes half closed, letting warmth chase away the ache of work. Heatherwise moves among them with a bucket and ladle, offering more hot water or a dash of scented herbs. She checks fires beneath the kettles and adds wood where needed. Her husband carries cooled river water in yokes to temper the tubs if they grow too hot. With a long-handled dipper, she pours clean water over shoulders and backs, a small rain that rinses lather and leaves skin tingling. The room fills with fragrant mist, the scent of clean skin and rosemary rising as subtle music. At one side of the hall is a small table for barbering and minor care. Today a travelling barber rents the space. He trims hair, shaves faces, scrapes heels smooth, and lances a small boil for a grateful farmer. Hellawise keeps his basin filled and his towels warm on a rail over the brazier. Children watch, wide-eyed, as razors flash and steam curls around the careful work. Mothers watch sharper still and judge the steadiness of a stranger's hand. Mid-morning is the busiest. Women cluster in one corner, washing hair with ash soap and rainwater kept soft in a barrel. The lather piles like meringue and rinses clear with herb tea. Men soak in deep silence or talk in murmured tones of harvest and trade. A pair of pilgrims, their boots caked from long miles, sigh with bliss as they ease into heat for the first dive in weeks. Hewise offers them bread and small beer while they wait for tubs to cool enough to enter. Hospitality is part of the bath's crafts. In an alcove, a mother bathes her infant in a shallow basin, crooning lullabies that mingle with the hiss of water. The baby's laughter rings bright for a moment before quiet returns. In another corner, two old friends scrub each other's backs with linen cloths, telling stories of the town when it was smaller and the fields came closer to the gates. A clerk reads softly to a goldsmith, reciting psalms between rinses. The older man hums the responses, soothed by ritual and heat alike. Outside, the river keeps bringing fresh water. The mule turns the wheel with steady patience, and the cauldrons bubble. Hellawise's husband skims foam and keeps the fire steady with split oak and a scoop of charcoal when flame needs bite. He adds fragrant herbs from a small garden behind the bathhouse, mint, sage, lavender, tied in bundles that float like small boats on the cauldron's surface. Steam rises thick and white into the morning sky. Wastewater runs back to a reed-bed trench that clears it before it returns to the river. The miller downstream appreciates that care. Not all who come seek only comfort. A carter with a stiff shoulder asks for a stronger sweat. Hewise leads him to the warm room, ladles water on hot stones till the room breathes like summer, then rubs his shoulder with goose grease scented with thyme. She shows him a stretch and a way to sleep with a rolled cloth under his neck. A seamstress arrives with hands cracked from winter. Hewise dissolves a little honey and salt in warm water and has her soak, then spreads a balm of lard and chamomile while the woman's face loosens into relief. By noon the first wave departs, leaving coins and thanks. Heavywise empties used tubs with a pull of the plug, sluices them clean, and scrubs the boards beneath, her arms slick with steam and water. She wrings out cloths, hangs them high in the rafters where heat will dry them by evening, and sprinkles fresh herbs. The air is warm and damp, but she moves with tireless energy, knowing more guests will come after the day's work slows. A bell from the tower carries noon across the roofs. Steam shivers in the sound. Hewise's husband brings in a new stack of faggots and ticks off his tally on a slate. Fuel in, coins taken, herbs spent. A boy from the Stag and Willow ducks in with a jug of small beer in trade for mint and sage. He leaves flushed and smiling after a quick splash at the cold trough. The afternoon brings a gentler pace. Artisans arrive, a weaver with sore shoulders, a goldsmith squinting from long hours at delicate work, a young clerk smudged with ink, a mason dusted pale as chalk. They sink into warmth and let silence unknot what labour has coiled. Heloise makes small conversation when wanted, but mostly she grants the gift of space and care. The bathhouse feels like a great exhale. On a shelf by the door sits a little box of tokens, round wooden discs the guilds give their poor when winter bites. A widow with a thin shawl brings one, and Heloise accepts it without a word, setting her in a private alcove and bringing tea of hyssop for her cough. Charity sits easy here. Heat shared is never heat lost. Talk ebbs and flows with the tubs. A tanner swears hot water cuts his smell better than any river Dunkadire, argues for vinegar after a traveller tells of city baths where musicians play while folk dine in the tubs, and everyone laughs to think of stew and soap together. In truth, on winter feast eves, the town's wealthier folk sometimes order trays of spiced wine and cakes to the alcoves. Heverwise allows it if crumbs are kept in bowls and cups returned. Cleanliness is half for honour. Heloise keeps a weather eye for danger. Scolds are rare but possible. She tests each tub with her forearm and warns the reckless. Floors slick quickly. Sand is sprinkled and swept as needed. A posted charm, a sprig of rowan over the stove sits beside a more practical bucket line. In fire, one soothes the mind and the other saves the roof. During bad outbreaks of fever, the bath may close for days. Heloise keeps a pot of vinegar by the door and wipes pegs and benches with it at dusk as habit. Custom shapes the week. Saturdays run long as folk wash for Sunday. Women's hours hold the morning, men the afternoon, with a bell between to clear the hall and change the water. On certain saints' days, the priest blesses the doorway and mutters about modesty, but he sends the choir boys down with tokens in frost anyway. In summer, the river is crowded and the bath cooler. In winter, the bath becomes a second hearth for the town, breath and steam turning the rafters into a soft cloud. Late afternoon light turns the steam golden. The noise overhead market and smithy fades as workers finish their day. More folk arrive to wash before evening meals. Fathers with children, friends who meet to soak and speak softly of widowed neighbours and marriage plans. A young pair in separate corners stealing glances through steam as if the future might be read in it. The bathhouse glows in its own warmth, the river outside gleaming with sunset. A pair of pilgrims returns to thank Heloise for the earlier bread. She sends them on with their flasks topped and a sprig of lavender tied at the neck. The barber packs up, leaving the table cleaner than he found it. Heloise tucks a coin in his palm and a warning not to overreach the next time a boil looks meaner than his needle. As night comes, the fires are banked lower. Heavywise closes the outer door but lets latecomers finish their bathing. The air cools slowly. The last guests linger, reluctant to leave the comfort of heat and fellowship. A miller hums an old harvest tune that echoes sweetly in the rafters. Others join softly, voices blending with the hiss of dying steam. In the warm room, a mason and a carpenter sit shoulder to shoulder, steam beading in their beards, arguing amiably about the best way to arch a span. When the final bather departs, Heatherwise and her husband work in companionable quiet. They pull the plugs, sluice the boards and scrub the last tubs, sweep the wet floor with heather brooms, and hang linen to dry in the warm rafters. Herbs are refreshed for tomorrow. The stove's door is left ajar with embers banked like a sleeping fox. Tools are rinsed and hung, buckets turned upside down to drain. The bathhouse exhales a long, damp sigh and settles into stillness. Before leaving, Heloise stands in the doorway, lantern in hand. She looks back on the empty hall, tubs gleaming faintly, benches dry, steam drifting away like the day's cares. In the quiet she hears the river through the vent, the far-off curfew, the tick of cooling copper. She smiles, weary but content. This place has washed a town clean, not just of sweat but of worry. It has given warmth where cold clung, and quiet where noise ruled. She and her husband step into the cool night. The mule snorts, hooves thud soft on damp earth. The river hums. Distant bells mark curfew. Behind them the bathhouse keeps its gentle heat, ready to welcome tomorrow's bodies and stories. The lantern light fades as they walk home, tired but at peace, knowing they have tended more than water. They have tended heart. Beneath the bright courtyards and guarded walls of a medieval castle lies another, darker world, the dungeon. Here, stone passages descend into damp earth. Air grows cold and still. Torches gutter against wet walls. Torches have very clear boundaries, apparently. It is a place of fear and waiting, yet also of quiet endurance. For every glittering hall above, there is this shadowed undercroft below, where prisoners measure time by dripping water and the shuffle of the jailer's boots, which, to be fair, keep better hours than most courtiers. Most castles did not build dungeons as torture chambers alone. They were secure storage rooms first. Deep cellars kept wine and grain safe, but when power needed a place to hold enemies, the lowest vaults served multifunctional real estate before it was fashionable. Over Tave, some were purpose-built, barrel-vaulted stone rooms behind iron doors, or pits sunk deep where escape was nearly impossible. A heavy portcullis or oak door bound with iron bars sealed each entrance. Keys hung at the jailer's belt like a jangling sermon on prudence. To reach the dungeon you pass a twisting stair called a trap stair, narrow, uneven, meant to slow attackers and humble the unwary. Air cools and smells of earth and old smoke. Pride slips 2 steps lower, just keeping balance. Sometimes a passage runs under moat or through bedrock, dripping with moisture. Lantern light glints on rusty shackles fixed into stone, on iron grills that close tiny ventilation shafts. Far above, a single slit of daylight or the echo of footsteps reminds you that life continues overhead, loudly, expensively, and without you. The jailer, or gaoler, lives half in shadow too. Often a trusted servant of the lord or constable, he keeps keys, feeds prisoners, maintains locks and chains. His work is quiet but vital. A lax jailer might lose a valuable captive, and with it ransom or leverage no one wants to explain. Misplaced duke at staff meeting. Yet he is it always cruel. Some speak gently to inmates, bring extra bread if allowed, or act as messenger for desperate letters. Others are feared brutes. The spectrum is wide, the keys jingle either way. Prisoners vary widely. Some are captured knights, held for ransom. Their stay can be surprisingly comfortable, with straw bedding, candles, and good food sent by family to encourage negotiation. Hostage hospitality is a genre. Others are thieves or rebels awaiting judgment, their cells bare, diet of stale bread and water, room service unresponsive. Political enemies, hostage nobles, even unlucky debtors might share close quarters. Each carves marks into stone to count days, because calendars are scarce and patience needs tallying. Daily life is slow. Morning brings the jailer's shuffle and clank of keys. He slides food through a hatch or enters with torch, announcing himself with that signature percussion. Prisoners rise stiff from straw, drink water from bucket, speak in low voices if sharing space. Some pray, some curse, some simply endure. An underrated talent. Light changes little, only faint glow through slit or lamp left to burn. Time blurs into drip, shuffle, sigh, the dungeon's idea of variety. Above, the castle lives on feasts, hunts, councils. Faint echoes sometimes reach down, thrum of music, clang of arms, a laugh that has never seen a draught. A prisoner hears life continuing, distant and unreachable. Yet messages can travel. Coins slipped to jailer bring news of ransom talks, family letters, even small comforts like better blanket or candle. Hope is a contraband that fits neatly under a cloak. Not all dungeons are equal. Some are simple locked rooms, others are grim oubliettes, narrow shafts with no door, or a grate above. Prisoner lowered by rope or ladder, then left with little contact. Such pits are rare but feared. Darkness and damp break spirits quickly. Gravity helps. Many castles, however, avoided such cruelty, preferring secure but livable cells, easier to keep ransoms healthy, which looks compassionate and accounts nicely. Torture is more legend than daily fact here. While some lords used threat or pain to extract confessions, routine dungeon life was mostly confinement, not spectacle. Far more common were chains to limit movement, stocks or pillory in courtyard, or simple cold hunger pains budget option. Still, tools existed. Rack, strappado, thumbscrews. Their shadow alone kept many compliant, nothing like decor with implications. Faith follows prisoners down, crosses scratched into walls, prayers whispered in dark, bargains offered to heaven with the fine print removed. Chaplains or monks sometimes visit, bringing scripture, confession, or last rites. Condemned men carve names, saints, or pleas into stone, hoping some future soul will read and understand, or at least wonder. Candles blessed on holy days might flicker briefly in gloom, a tiny rebellion against damp and doubt. Season matters even here. Winter brings bitter cold and wet breath mists in air. Frost creeps across walls like quiet ivy. Summer may stink of rot and sweat. Water seeps in after storms to remind you nature pays no bail. Mice and rats are constant companions, terrible conversationalists, excellent survivors. The jailer battles mold and illness when he can, though prisoners often weaken from poor air and diet. The menu is consistent, reviews are not. Yet life persists. Captives trade stories, sing quietly to keep courage, scratch chessboards into floor, fashion dice from bread luck baked fresh daily. Some befriend jailer or mice, some write letters if literate. Knights might practice sword drills with wooden staves if allowed, dignity creaking like old hinges. Small rituals keep sanity, washing face with cold water, stretching, murmuring prayers at dawn, reciting a poem until it fits the cell. Occasionally freedom comes, a ransom paid, a truce signed, a pardon granted. Keys turn, door groans, prisoner steps blinking into light as if the sun has been promoted. Sometimes freedom means death. Condemned led to scaffold or gallows. Both fates begin with that same clank of lock one morning. Destiny has an oddly standardized soundtrack. The dungeon is also part of castle strategy. Holding a rival lord or enemy knight can win wealth and peace. Leverage looks best in chains. Threat of cell keeps local peasants loyal, or at least punctual. During siege, prisoners might be bargaining chips. The gaoler thus keeps careful record of who sleeps where, who owes what, who might escape. An accountant with fewer windows. Above all, the dungeon reminds that castles are not only homes but instruments of power. Stone keeps secure food, arms, and people, friend or foe, with the calm efficiency of gravity. To walk its depths is to feel that authority made real in chill air and iron bars, law that does not need to raise its voice because the walls do it for her. So when you imagine castle life, do not stop at banners and banquets. Picture also the dungeon, silent, cold, but alive with whispered hopes, the steady duty of the jailer, and the slow passing of days. Here power waits and watches, patient as stone, and just about as talkative, though considerably better at keeping appointments. The great hall of the castle lay quiet in the first pale hours of the day. Its stone walls held the coolness of the night, and the long flagged floor was damp with the hush of early mist. High above, blackened oak beams stretched into shadow, and from them hung banners faded by years of smoke from torches and hearth. Nothing ages fabric like ambition and tallow. A faint scent of ash and tallow drifted under the arched roof. At the far end, the dais stood empty, the Lord's carved chair waiting in the dimness, flanked by a pair of tall iron candlesticks that still held the stubs of last night's feast, small monuments to victory over roasted meat. The hall was the heart of the castle, and though it slumbered now, it would soon stir to the pattern of the day. First came the servants, quiet-footed and sleepy-eyed, carrying brooms of birch and rags for polishing. They swept the rush-strewn floor, shaking out the old stalks that had caught scraps of food and ash. The rushes remember what the nobles prefer to forget. Mice scattered to corners as the work began. Buckets of clean herbs, mint, lavender, and dried sweet flag were scattered among the new rushes, filling the air with a cool, fresh scent that implied virtue had been here all along, merely waiting for someone with a broom. At the hearth, where a fire smouldered low, two boys coaxed the embers back to life. They fed them with dry kindling, and soon a curl of smoke lifted, followed by the first gentle crackle of flame. The hearth was vast enough to walk into, blackened stone rising like a cave. Here whole trees could be burned in winter, and sometimes were, for morale. Iron pots hung ready, soot-darkened but polished where hands had grasped them for years. Above the lintel, carved into the stone, the family's crest stood watch, a lion rampant, worn smooth by smoke and self-regard. As the fire strengthened, so too did the light in the hall. Sun found its way through the narrow windows set high in the wall, falling in thin beams that caught the floating dust, golden proof that even dust look expensive if lit correctly. More servants arrived, carrying benches to be set along the trestle tables. These tables could be taken down when space was needed. This hall was both dining room and court, market and theatre, and occasionally impromptu barracks for people who lost track of the wine. Today they were arranged for the morning meal, long planks laid across sturdy trestles, flanked by benches polished by generations of use, and a long parade of impatient elbows. Soon the kitchen door opened with a bang, and warmth and smell rolled out. Bread just baked, porridge steaming, wheels of soft cheese cut for serving. Two women carried in baskets of trenchers, flat rounds of coarse bread that would serve as both plate and food, a triumph of efficiency that modern plates will never live down. Behind them came a boy balancing a tray of pottery mugs, with the expression of one who has seen mugs behave badly. The hall filled with the earthy scents of bread and smoke, and the quiet murmur of preparation. When all was nearly ready, the first of the household began to drift in. Stable boys came first, their hair still damp from the trough where they had washed. A huntsman or two, lean and sun-browned, leaned their spears in the corner before taking seats near the hearth. They spoke in low voices, rubbing sleep from their eyes, boots dusty from the yard. Then maids came, laughing softly among themselves, and soon a murmur of life filled the great room, conversational equivalent of stirring porridge. The steward entered at last, thin and brisk, a bundle of keys at his belt. He walked the hall with sharp gaze, inspecting tables, hearth, and banners. If a bench was crooked, he straightened it. If a candle guttered, he trimmed the wick with a small iron snuffer. Only when all was to his satisfaction did he give a short nod to the doorkeeper, who moved to stand by the great doors of oak bound with iron. The steward's nod was not lavish, but in this economy it spent like gold. With a groan and echo, the doors swung wide. The day had begun. Light and sound spilled in the ring of hammers from the smithy, a distant shout from the yard, the clatter of pails. Into this stride came the knights and men-at-arms, armour clinking softly as they crossed the hall. Some removed their helmets and set them on the benches. Others still smelled of the stables and horse sweat, evidence of virtue according to the knights, and of ventilation according to everyone else. Pages followed, small and serious, carrying cloaks and belts as if they were bearing treaties. Last came the lord himself, tall beneath his fur-lined mantle, his sword at his hip. Behind him trailed his household chaplain, a grave man in dark robes, and the lady of the castle, calm and pale beneath her veil. At their entrance the company rose and bowed. The lord took his seat on the high dais, his lady sat beside him, and the chaplain stood ready with morning blessing, because even porridge performs better under supervision. The hall grew still but for the crack of the fire. Grace was said, and the morning meal began. It was simple, oat porridge sweetened with honey, bread still warm, cheese and apples from the storehouse, a little ale for the men, watered wine for the household, prudence by dilution. Pages hurried to and fro, filling mugs and fetching what was needed. Dogs slunk between the benches hoping for scraps. A hawk perched silently on its master's wrist, pretending not to notice the cheese. Laughter and talk rose steadily, echoing against the stone vault. As the meal ended, servants swept away the trenchers and wiped the tables. Some would be fed to pigs, others were taken to the poor at the castle gate. Charity travelling by bread. The lord remained seated, however, for the hall was now to be a place of justice. A small crowd of villagers and tenants had gathered at the far end, hats in hand, waiting to speak their petitions. The steward called them forward one by one, arranging the morning's anxieties into a tidy queue. First came a miller complaining of broken rights to his stream, then a widow asking for relief from tax. The lord listened gravely, his lady murmuring counsel at his side. Each case was considered. Sometimes the chaplain advised according to custom or scripture, which, in a pleasant surprise, often agreed. The steward kept a careful tally on parchment, while a scribe scratched notes with squeaking quill mouse of bureaucracy. From time to time the heavy door creaked as new supplicants entered, or the dismissed left bowing low. Justice in the great hall was not swift, but it was public, and all listened. Sometimes the lord spoke in clipped words, sometimes he questioned sharply, and sometimes, moved by pity, he leaned back and sighed before granting mercy. The lady would whisper and place a hand upon his arm. The steward would nod briskly and make a mark in the ledger. The hall grew warm with voices, the fire a steady backdrop to this theatre of rule, where the props are simple and the consequences are not. When petitions ended, the mood changed again. Now came the herald with news from distant lands carrying rolled parchments sealed in wax. Riders had brought word of a fair to held, of travellers to be granted passage, of unrest in a nearby town. Messengers knelt and spoke their tidings. Pages darted in with water and bread for them. Hospitality is cheaper than fainting. The lord leaned forward, questioning, while his knights murmured among themselves, already sharpening opinions they would later blunt with facts. By noon the hall was lively with planning. A hunting party would ride the next day. Repairs to the outer wall must be seen to. The armourer requested more iron for his forge again. Orders were given and men dispatched. The air filled with purposeful clatter. Swords belted on, boots ringing on stone, benches dragged aside to clear space. Soon the hall would be nearly empty again, its duties done until evening, like a stage between acts with the scenery catching its breath. As the sun slanted lower, servants returned to prepare the hall for supper. Fresh rushes were spread, the fire built high, and trestle tables set for a feast. For tonight a local lord would visit, bringing his retinue and his appetite for both meat and flattery. The kitchen roared with activity, spits turning, pots bubbling, bread baking anew. The smell of roasting meat drifted through the doorways, rich and tempting, and not remotely subtle. The musicians arrived next, tuning lutes and fiddles, setting small stools near the dais. Torches were lit in their iron sconces, filling the hall with flickering warmth. Banners caught the firelight and seemed to sway gently in the rising heat, as if applauding the arrangements. Children peeked in from the passageways, giggling at the busy scene before being shooed away. Dogs barked and leapt as platters were carried past committed patrons of the arts. Then came the guests, knights in polished mail, ladies in velvet and pearls, merchants seeking favour. The lord greeted them at the threshold, the lady offering soft words of welcome. Cloaks were hung, and men bowed before taking seats. Soon the tables groaned beneath their weight. Venison pies, roasted fowl, trenchers piled with stewed fruits, flagons of ale and wine, an edible argument for loyalty. The feast began with prayer and the breaking of bread. Then talk rose loud and merry, music weaving through the noise of eating and laughter. The great hall, solemn this morning, now shone with life and power. The heart of the castle made warm and bright, and only occasionally sticky. Stories were told of hunts and battles, riddles and jests passed from mouth to mouth. Children were brought in to sing or recite, earning coins and smiles, and a lifelong belief that applause means bedtime is delayed. Minstrels played until the candles dripped low and the torches burned short. Sometimes a knight would rise to dance with a lady, boots clattering on the flagstones, cloaks sweeping wide. Sometimes the lord himself would laugh aloud, the weight of justice forgotten for the moment, which is precisely what feasts are for. Dogs gnawed bones beneath the benches. A falcon slept, hooded, on its perch, dreaming of a stricter guest list. As night deepened, the tables cleared again. Servants moved quietly to stack benches and sweep crumbs. The musicians packed their instruments with the care of men who intend to be paid again. Guests retired to chambers in the castle or to lodgings beyond the gate. The lord and lady were led away by candle-bearing pages, their day of power and hospitality done, and least until sunrise asks for an encore. At last the fire burned low to glowing coals. The great hall stood empty save for a single guard by the door, and the faint rustle of mice in the rushes the night staff. The banners hung still, catching the last breath of heat. Moonlight slipped through the high windows, silvering the long floor, and so the hall, which had woken to rule and to feast, returned to its quiet watch through the night. A stage at rest, a hearth at hush, a room that remembers everything and gossips to no one. The day of court dawned cold and pale over the castle. Mist clung to the moat and drifted across the cobbled yard, blurring the shapes of men and beasts already at work. The mist, ever helpful, prefers its judgment softened at the edges. Beyond the high outer gate, villagers gathered in the chill, waiting for permission to enter and present their petitions. Within the walls the great tower loomed, its narrow windows dark against the dawn, and from its crown a single banner stirred in the early breeze, because nothing says authority like fabric catching a draught. Inside, the great hall was already stirring to life, though the lord had not yet appeared. Power is very punctual about letting others de early. Servants moved in measured silence, sweeping yesterday's rushes and scattering new ones laced with mint and dried marigold. The long trestle tables that had stood for supper were carried aside. Today the hall must be clear for the business of rule. At the far end the dais was prepared with solemn care. A high-backed chair carved with lions' heads was drawn forward and draped with a heavy cloth of red and gold, Subtlety taking the morning off. At its side a smaller seat awaited the lady of the castle, and a narrow lectern was set for the steward who would read the rolls of law, a man and his paperwork, a tale as old as ink. The fire on the hearth was coaxed into brightness, its light catching the polished iron of candle-stands and the brass studs of the lord's chair. Pages hurried with cushions and stools for visiting knights and clerks, because comfort lends courage to opinions. The steward himself arrived before sunrise, thin and brisk, his bundle of scrolls hugged to his chest, his keys clinking as he strode to the dais. He oversaw everything, muttering now and then to the beadle, who would keep order among the crowd. Translation: remind enthusiasm, it has boundaries. As the first bells of the day rang from the chapel tower, the hall began to fill. Men-at-arms took their places along the walls, halberds upright, eyes keen decorative columns that stare back. A scribe spread his inks and sharpened quills at a low table to one side. The chaplain entered, grave in dark robe and white collar, and took his place near the Lord's chair to advise on oaths and matters of conscience, a necessary accessory when truth needs a referee. Courtiers and household knights followed, each nodding to the steward before taking position. The hum of voices grew, but never too loud. This was a solemn day, and even gossip wore its better shoes. Then the great oak doors swung wide. The Lord entered slowly, his cloak trimmed with fur against the morning chill, his sword at his hip, but peaceably sheathed it enjoys the scenery. Behind him came the lady, serene and watchful, a long veil trailing from her headdress. Pages hurried ahead to light fresh candles on the dais. The crowd bent low as the pair mounted the steps and took their seats. The chaplain murmured a blessing. The steward lifted his staff and called the hall to order, ancient ritual by which noise learns manners. The first petitioner stepped forward, a farmer, hat in hand, face worn by sun and weather. He bowed deeply before speaking, his words simple and halting, as he told of a neighbour's ox straying into his barley and ruining the young crop. The steward read from a scroll the custom of the region. The Lord leaned forward, asking quiet questions, while the lady whispered a suggestion at his side, domestic diplomacy, fluent in consequences. At last the judgment was given. The neighbour must pay in grain at harvest. The farmer bowed again and backed away, relief on his face, priceless harvest of being heard. Next came a merchant, robes fine but voice edged with worry. Bandits on the forest road, he said, had stolen a wagon of cloth. The Lord's brow furrowed. He questioned the merchant carefully, learning the place and hour of attack. Then he turned to his captain of the guard, who stepped forward, saluted, and promised a mounted patrol before week's end. Bandits hate punctuality. The scribe wrote swiftly, quill scratching a small storm. The merchant bowed and withdrew, a little straighter now, prophet being quite fond of security. One by one they came, millers disputing rights to the stream, widows asking for relief from tax, craftsmen protesting unfair tolls at the gate. Some matters were small and swiftly judged, others roused long debate. No subject is too tiny to become enormous when money is nearby. The chaplain reminded the hall of the law of sanctuary and the charity due to the poor. The steward cross-checked the castle's rolls to ensure no ruling would breach long-held custom. Parchment, too, has memory. The lady listened keenly, speaking softly to the Lord when mercy might soften a stern decree. She is the hinge on which severity learns to swing. Sometimes the mood grew tense. A poacher was brought in under guard, his hands bound. A gaunt rabbit dangling from his belt as proof exhibits A and B respectively, hunger and habit. The man knelt, pale with fear, as the Lord questioned him. The chaplain spoke of trespass and repentance, the captain of the guard of duty to the forest law. At last the Lord spared the man's life but fined him harshly and ordered him to serve a month at the kennels. The hall let out a breath as the poacher was led away, alive but chastened, justice choosing the whip instead of the sword for once. By mid-morning the doors opened again to admit envoys from a nearby manor. They carried letters sealed with wax requesting arbitration in a boundary dispute. 2 fields, 1 line, infinite opinions. The steward read the letters aloud in a clear voice while the lord and lady conferred. A map was brought forth, its edges curled and worn, showing streams and copses, meadows and mill. Knights craned to see. After long debate, the lord deferred judgment until witnesses could be called. He would send riders to walk the land. Such matters, he knew, could not be rushed. Lines drawn in haste have a talent for becoming battlefields. All this while the hall hummed with quiet life. Dogs nosed through the rushes for crumbs, the original auditors. Pages ran messages to the kitchens for bread and ale to refresh the company. Now and then a servant stoked the fire, sending sparks whirling into the smoky light, tiny suns petitioning the rafters. Outside the windows the mist lifted, showing a bright cold sky. Bells rang again from the chapel, marking the passage of the morning time filing its report. At last the steward tapped his staff and called the final cases. A pair of young men came to swear fealty, kneeling before the Lord with hands clasped. The chaplain blessed their oaths, the lady smiled gently as each rose, new vassals bound by promise ambition's favourite knot. Then came a travelling minstrel to ask leave to perform at the evening meal. The Lord granted it with a nod, and the hall relaxed, glad for the promise of song after such sober hours. Policy pairs well with melody. When the last petitioner had gone, the Lord stood. The men-at-arms struck their halberds once upon the floor, a sharp echo that silenced the hall. Nothing persuades quiet like metal hitting stone. The chaplain spoke a short prayer, commending the judgments given and asking for wisdom in their keeping. Then the Lord descended the dais and left through the side passage to his private chambers, the lady following with a glance backward at the assembled household, one last stitch to keep the day from unravelling. Slowly the tension drained from the room. The steward gathered his scrolls and keys, speaking quietly with the scribe. Men-at-arms returned to their posts on the walls. Courtiers clustered to discuss the morning's decisions, editing events into anecdotes at remarkable speed. The great hall, so solemn moments before, shifted again toward ordinary life. Soon servants would bring trestle tables back for the noon meal. Soon the clang of dishes and chatter of pages would replace the hush of judgment-proof that governance, like appetite, keeps regular hours. But for a time the air still held the weight of what had passed. Here in this hall, under banners faded by smoke and years, lives had been shaped. Fields secured, taxes lifted, punishments given, oaths sworn. The Lord's power had shown itself not in sword alone, but in measured word. In justice seen and heard by all, spectacle has its uses, fairness more low. The lady's quiet counsel and the chaplain's grave advice had tempered it, and the steward's records would make it lasting, ink doing what steel cannot. Outside the great doors the petitioners dispersed, some relieved, some muttering, some smiling through tears. They crossed the drawbridge into the cold bright day, returning to farms and shops with news to share. Word of the court's rulings would spread by evening, carried in taverns and market stalls, shaping the life of the lands around the castle, policy travelling at the speed of bread and ale. Inside, the hall breathed again. Smoke curled from the hearth, mingling with the scents of rushes and tallow. A boy swept away footprints from the morning's crowd. A dog stretched and yawned in the warmth, a professional in the field of morale. Soon this place would echo with laughter and music, with the clatter of trenchers and the hum of feast. But just now it was still, and in that stillness the memory of justice lingered like the fading echo of a bell, quiet, exact, and impossible to pretend you didn't hear. Deep within the castle's thick walls, far from the laughter of the great hall and the warmth of the kitchens, lay the armory. Its door was of oak banded with iron, worn smooth where countless hands had pushed it open. Apparently no one trusts a gentle knock when steel is involved. Beyond, the air was cool and dry, heavy with the scent of oiled leather and steel. Light slipped in through narrow slit high in the wall, catching on metal and make the room glow with a quiet silvery sheen, sort of glow that says, politely, please do not bleed on the inventory. Here was stored the castle's strength. Racks of spears stood in orderly lines, ash shafts polished and points dark with oil. Shields leaned along the walls, their painted devices dulled from years of use, edges nicked and mended with rawhide heraldry, ages like everyone else. In the centre, great tables held swords, some slender and long for riding, others heavy-bladed for the press of battle. Suits of mail hung from iron hooks, the links shimmering like rain when the light touched them. Lovely, if you ignored the part where it pinches your armpits. The master of the armory arrived first each morning. He was a broad man, his beard touched with grey, his hands scarred but deft. From a peg he took his leather apron and tied it on with practised ease. He checked the great room with a soldier's eye, the dryness of the air, the neatness of the racks, the safety of each blade. Moisture was an enemy here. So was disorder, rust and chaos, the famous double act. Then he stirred the small brazier in the corner and set a pot of oil to warm, breakfast for steel and, by the smell of it, a cologne for everyone else. Soon his apprentices came clattering down the stone stair, boys of 12 or so, eager and weary in equal measure. They swept the floor, wiped dust from hilts, and carried suits of mail to the racks. One boy began pumping the whetstone wheel, its low whir filling the quiet room. Another mixed beeswax with tallow for the leather belts and scabbards. The master gave them their orders in short, gruff words, but with a kindness that showed in the small nod he gave when a task was well done. Praise is rationed here, like arrows, handed out only when it hits. This was not a place of idle display. Each item here had purpose, and each needed care. Swords were examined for rust, their edges touched to the wheel and then honed with a soft stone until keen. Spearheads were checked for cracks, shafts were sanded smooth and rubbed with oil, shields were repaired, bindings tightened, paint refreshed where the device had faded. Even the great crossbows, powerful and dangerous, were disassembled and cleaned, their strings waxed, their stocks polished. Every murder machine is, at heart, a high-maintenance relationship. The master's own corner was a wonder of tools. Awls, rivets, hammers, tongs, leather scraps for mending straps, buckles of brass and steel, bowls of dark oil that smelled faintly of pine. From here he could make or mend nearly anything the garrison might need. He kept careful record, too, which knight's harness was being repaired, which soldier's sword needed regrinding, which helmets must be fitted anew. His ledger, though plain, was as important as any blade. After all, battles are lost more often by arithmetic than by courage. Numbers are terribly unsentimental. From time to time, men-at-arms came down the stair to fetch or return gear. A soldier might bring his mail for patching, showing where a link had broken in last week's drill. A page might arrive to collect a clean sword for his master, standing awkwardly under the armourer's quiet scrutiny. Each was served in turn, but none before the master had checked and approved the work. To him, a loose rivet or a dull edge was no small thing. It could mean life or death, or at minimum, a very awkward apology to a very disappointed lord. As the morning passed, the room rang with soft music of craft, the rasp of files, the whisper of cloth on steel, the slow rhythmic thump of a hammer closing a rivet. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light. The apprentices sweated at the wheel, but smiled when the master passed, and ran a calloused thumb along their finished edges. He taught as he worked, explaining how to harden a blade, why to oil mail in winter, how to fit a helm so it would not twist in battle fashion tip. A helmet that spins is only amusing to your enemies. Sometimes knights themselves came, bringing fine pieces for care. One arrived today. Sir Alaric, tall and broad-shouldered, his surcoat dusty from the road, he bore a sword with a deep notch near the guard. The master frowned, turning it in the light. They spoke softly, knight and craftsman, about the break of the edge, the grind it would take to make it true again. Sir Alaric watched with respect as the master set to work, sparks flaring at the wheel while the boy pumped steadily. Glitter, but for people who prefer their jewellery, kinetic and slightly terrifying. At noon the apprentices ate their bread and cheese in a corner, wiping hands clean of oil before touching food. The kitchen has opinions about additives. The master took only a little, busy still with a helm that needed riveting. Outside the armory the castle bustled. Bells rang, hooves clattered. But here the world seemed slower, marked by patient craft and quiet diligence. This was the hidden forge of safety. If the Lord's men rode to war, it would be the master's care that kept them whole, which is a poetic way of saying he prevents extremely preventable disasters. By afternoon, the room grew warmer from the brazier and the work. The boys cleaned a suit of plate, brought in by a knight squire. Breastplate, backplate, vambraces, greaves. Each piece was rubbed with vinegar and salt to lift spots of rust, then polished to a deep, cold shine. The master checked every strap, every buckle, testing with firm hands until satisfied. He showed the boys how to lace the pieces in proper order, teaching them the craft that kept warriors safe beneath their shining shells, knighthood. 40% courage, 60% buckles. A messenger arrived late in the day with a request from the steward. A patrol must ride tomorrow at dawn, and their gear must be ready. The master nodded and went to the racks. He chose spears of sound ash and straight grain, selected a bundle of stout crossbows, and oversaw the stringing himself. Arrows were counted, their heads checked for sharpness and secure binding. Helmets were pulled from shelves and lined up neatly, each with its strap strong and clean, because dawn has a habit of revealing every shortcut you took after dusk. As evening drew on, the day's repairs were done. Swords gleamed on their racks, shields were stacked with painted faces freshened, mail hung oiled and whole. The apprentices swept the floor, gathering fallen filings of steel and stray bits of leather. The master closed his ledger with a thump, and wiped his hands on a rag black with years of work. He looked around the armory once more, eyes sharp, and nodded in quiet approval, the rare smile allotted to a room that won't try to kill anyone today. Before the fires in the great hall blazed for supper, knights and men-at-arms came again to collect their gear. Some laughed and joked as they strapped on swords, others were quiet, testing an edge with thumb or the swing of a wrist. Each left with gear secure, owing silent thanks to the patient hands that had made it ready. The master watched them go. Pride hidden but strong beneath his calm glory tends to stand in the sunlight, but competence keeps the door from falling off its hinges. When the last had departed and the room was still, the apprentices banked the brazier and hung up aprons. The light had turned soft and gold through the high slit. The master walked once around the room, touching a shield here, a helm there, as if to bless his charges. Then he shut the heavy door and turned the great iron key. Outside, the castle feasted and laughed. Inside, the armory lay quiet, its strength sleeping but ready for whatever the morrow might bring, which, historically, is rarely embroidery. At the very edge of the castle's outer wall stood the Gatehouse, a squat, powerful tower built to watch the world beyond. Its great oak doors, bound with iron, were the mouth of the castle, and not the smiling kind. Here, every traveller, merchant and pilgrim passed. Here, guards kept wary eyes on the road, and watchmen called to one another across battlements. The gatehouse was both welcome and warning, a threshold where peace could turn to defence in the beat of a heart faster if you forget your papers. Before dawn the watch changed. The night guards, stiff with cold, stamped their boots on the stone as they waited for relief. Above, in the narrow chamber of the upper gate, a brazier burned low, casting a red glow on faces shadowed by helms fashioned to intimidating and coincidentally terrible for peripheral vision. Down below, a sleepy porter unlocked the wicket door, a small man-sized opening within the great gate, so that the day guard could file out. They came yawning and laughing softly, cloaks wrapped tight, spears glinting faintly in the dim light, which is the medieval version of coffee. The sergeant of the gate arrived next, a weathered man with sharp eyes. He examined the hinges and bolts, checked the drawbridge chains, and thumped the great oak doors with the butt of his spear to hear their solid heart. The door passed its physical. Then he unlocked the winch house, its gears and ropes creaked, as the portcullis, an iron-toothed grille, was hauled slowly upward. The sound rang deep and heavy. echoing through the cold stone the castle's morning yawn. Beyond, the outer road was empty but for morning mist curling in low folds, doing its best to look mysterious. The gatehouse itself was a small world. On one side stood the guardroom, a long low chamber with benches, weapons racks and a small hearth where a pot of broth simmered for the men, seasoned liberally with smoke and gossip. Here they played dice on quiet hours, or mended straps, or sharpened spearheads on whetstones. On the other side lay the porter's room, crowded with keys, ledgers, and the great horns used to sound alarm music but for emergencies. Stairs wound up to the parapet, where lookouts scanned the horizon with the kind of focus usually reserved for spotting rain at harvest. As dawn brightened, the day's work began. Merchants arrived first, their carts piled with barrels and bales. Each halted before the bridge while the sergeant strode out, demanding tolls and inspecting goods. Wheels rumbled across the timbers as the drawbridge groaned under weight, a helpful reminder that wood also has feelings. Some merchants complained at the fee, others paid readily, eager to sell within the safety of the walls. A clerk sat nearby, tallying coin and writing the names of those who passed, because memory is noble until it forgets who owes what. Soon came villagers with eggs and butter, woodcutters with carts of faggots, shepherds driving small flocks to market. The guards inspected for weapons and smuggled goods, though kindly enough to the familiar faces, nobody wants to arrest someone's aunt over a hidden sausage. Children ran ahead, waving to the men on the wall. Dogs sniffed at baskets and wagons, but were shooed off with gentle kicks. The gatehouse was stern, but it was also the rhythm of ordinary life, a place where the castle and its people met and mutually decided to keep civilization going for one more day. From time to time a stranger appeared, and the tone sharpened. One morning it was a wandering minstrel with lute on his back. The sergeant questioned him carefully before allowing him through. The song about taxes was, regrettably, not requested. Another day came a party of armed men in a lord's livery, not known to the garrison. The portcullis stayed down while messengers were sent to the keep. Only when permission returned from within were the strangers admitted, their swords peace-bound with cords of leather, fashionably inconvenient. The gatehouse was ready for war, as well as welcome. Above the arch hung murder holes, dark and silent now, but ready to pour boiling water or stones if ever enemies broke the bridge. Customer service policies vary by circumstance. On the battlements stood great cauldrons for pitch, racks for bows and crossbows, barrels of stones. The winch for the drawbridge was strong enough to raise it in moments, cutting the castle off from the road, social distancing, heavy architecture edition. The men drilled each week, the chains groaning as the bridge swung up and the portcullis dropped with a clang that said, quite clearly, "Office hours are over." At midday the guards ate their pottage in shifts, some remaining at watch while others sat by the hearth. Dice rattled on the table, one man mended his boots, another told tales of the forest road, all strictly accurate if you ignore the parts that weren't. The sergeant walked the parapet, scanning the horizon for dust clouds that might mean riders. Sometimes a messenger would gallop in, blowing horn and waving writs. The portcullis would rise just high enough to admit him before slamming shut again, like a very punctual jaw. The life of the gate was half boredom, half sudden alarm, and entirely allergic to complacency. One afternoon brought such alarm. A cart approached too fast, driven by men who did not halt when hailed. The sergeant roared a command. The guards braced spears. The portcullis rattled down halfway before the cart stopped in a cloud of dust. Words flew, weapons bristled. Then, slowly, tempers cooled. The men proved to be panicked peasants fleeing bandits, and they were let through with warning to slow next time speed limits, not officially posted, universally enforced. Still, the moment left the hall tense, the men's hands tight on spear shafts long after adrenaline lingers. That's its hobby. Toward evening, travellers trickled in, seeking safety before the gates shut for the night. Pilgrims dusty from the road, merchants with tired mules, a peddler with pans clanging on his back, all paid their toll and passed under the watchful eyes of the guard. Children lingered to stare up at the murder holes, laughing nervously as they imagined what might fall from them. Education through anxiety. The great winch creaked one last time to lift the portcullis for a slow wagon laden with hay, which is never in a hurry and resents the suggestion. When the sun slid behind the hills and the outer road grew shadowed, the sergeant gave his order. The portcullis came rattling down with finality, its iron teeth biting the stone. The drawbridge was hauled up inch by inch, groaning as it closed off the moat. The great oak doors swung shut with a deep thud, bolts sliding home. Outside, the road fell silent. Inside, the gatehouse was a fortress, the architectural equivalent of a firm handshake that does not let go. Night duty began. The guardroom fire was built high, and the men drew lots for the parapet watch. Some wrapped in cloaks and went up to pace the walls, eyes sharp for lanterns or torchlight beyond. Others stayed below, listening for knocks on the postern door or horns from the countryside. The porter trimmed the lanterns along the passage so that any intruder would be well lit. Hospitality, but make it tactical. The sergeant, as ever, made his rounds with quiet, sharp steps. Yet even in weariness there was peace. The gatehouse was old and strong, and its men knew their craft. They shared stories to pass the long hours, of sieges past, of tricks to test a merchant's honesty, of ghosts said to haunt the deep archway at midnight. Some believed, some laughed, but all listened, grateful for talk against the cold dark. The walls listened too, as walls do, and promised to keep their secrets until properly bribed with limewash. Toward midnight the wind rose, howling through arrow slits. The brazier flickered low, boots clattered softly as the watch changed again. Far below, the moat rippled in the dark, a silent black ring around the castle, looking innocent and tasting of regret. Inside, the guardroom slept in turns, helmets beside them, spears propped within easy reach. Dreams here are practical. Sound hinges, a quiet horn, bread still warm at dawn. By the time first light crept pale and thin over the outer road, the gatehouse was ready to wake again. The night watch shook themselves free of sleep. The day guard arrived, stamping and yawning. The sergeant checked the chains and locks, satisfied with their soundness, music to a cautious soul. Then the drawbridge groaned downward, the portcullis rose, and the oak doors swung wide once more. The castle breathed out into the waking world, safe and strong behind its ancient teeth-polite smile restored, but do note the bite. At dawn, the castle's outer meadow lay silvered with dew, the grass bending under a thin veil of mist. All was quiet but for the clink of stakes and the low voices of men setting the day's stage. Nature's hush kindly rescheduled for spectacle. Soon this wide green would change from still pasture to roaring festival. Tournament field where knights would prove their skill and courage before lord and lady, merchant and peasant alike, and possibly a goose with strong opinions. Carpenters came first, hauling long timbers to build the tillyard. They hammered railings into place to divide the lists, the long narrow lane where knights would charge each other with lowered lances, because galloping point first at a friend is good sport. Canvas pavilions rose beyond, bright with the colours of noble houses, crimson lions, black stags, silver stars, subtlety not being the point of heraldry. Pages ran to and fro, pounding stakes and tying ropes, their breath white in the cold. By the time the first sun struck the field, the skeleton of the day's spectacle stood ready and frankly a little pleased with itself. Vendors arrived next, pushing carts heavy with wares. Bakers stacked pies and crusty bread. Brewers rolled barrels of ale. Tinkers unpacked knives and trinkets for sale. Just in case a spontaneous marketplace broke out, it would. The smell of roasting meat soon drifted across the damp grass as spits were set up near the edge of the meadow. Bright flags snapped in the rising breeze. A minstrel strummed a lute while waiting for the crowd, bravely rehearsing the ballad in which everyone tips handsomely. From the castle gate came the heralds, proud in tabards bearing the Lord's arms. They inspected the lists, tested the ropes, and barked orders to clear the way. Project management, but louder. With them rode the master of the games, tall and solemn, carrying a staff tipped with silver, the universal symbol for "I'm in charge, do as the stick says." He examined the rails, checked the ground for holes that might trip a horse, and nodded his approval. Then he ordered the banners raised, one for each knight who would ride, their colours bright against the pale morning sky, as if the weather might forget to be impressed. By mid-morning the field was alive. Farmers streamed in from the surrounding countryside, children perched on shoulders or tugging at skirts. Merchants claimed good places to watch, spreading blankets and unpacking baskets of food with the calm of people who know the best vantage point is also where the pies are. Ladies from nearby manors arrived in wagons, their servants bustling with stools and cushions. Trumpeters sounded testing calls, their notes bright and brassy across the open air, subtle hint, important things will occur. Then came the knights. One by one they rode down from the castle, splendid on their destriers. Mail gleamed where the sun struck. Surcoats of silk or wool showed each man's colours, because if you're going to be hit with a lance, you should at least look coordinated. Pages trotted behind with spare lances and shields. Helmets hung from saddles or were carried high by squires. Some knights waved to the crowd, to cheers and calls. Others rode silent, deep in thought, counting ribs and prayers in equal measure. The smell of horse and leather mingled with the sharp tang of oiled steel, the perfume of impending heroism. The lord and lady arrived last, seated on a raised wooden stand draped in cloth of gold, because gravity works but so does staging. With them came courtiers, heralds, and a company of musicians. As the trumpets sounded, the crowd rose to cheer, hats waving, children shrieking with delight. The lord stood and lifted a hand for silence. The herald stepped forward and called the opening of the games in a voice that carried across the whole field and likely into next week. The day began with the melee, a grand mock battle between teams of knights. Lances were set aside, swords blunted but still heavy were drawn, mock pain being notably similar to the usual kind. At a horn's blast, the two sides thundered together in a whirl of horses and shouting. Dust rose, bright against the morning light. The crowd gasped and roared as men clashed and circled, their helms shining, their banners whipping in the wind. Though play, it was no gentle game. More than one man would carry bruises home, trophies nobody hangs on the wall. After the melee, pages helped their masters back to the pavilions. Armour was loosened, sweat-wet linen changed, and horses rubbed down with straw, the only spa package available. Ale was brought, wounds were checked and bound if needed. The air smelled of trampled grass and hot iron, of horse and men and excitement. Meanwhile jugglers and minstrels entertained the crowd, and vendors sold meat pies and cups of spiced wine. Children ran laughing among the tents, wooden swords clacking in flawless imitation of poor life choices. Then came the joust, the heart of the tournament. The rail between the lists was checked once more, its ropes taut, its shields freshly hung. Stage fright is for people, not equipment. Heralds rode out, calling the names of the first pair of challengers. The crowd hushed, then roared as the knights took their places at either end of the long lane. Lances gleamed, shields were set, and banners rippled behind them, ready to be dramatic on demand. The trumpets sounded. Horses surged forward, pounding the ground with thunder. Dust flew as the two knights hurtled toward one another, lances level, eyes fixed through narrow visor slit, excellent for focus, terrible for peripheral regret. They struck with a crash like splitting oak. One lance shattered, splinters flying. The crowd gasped and then cheered wildly as the riders wheeled and raised their weapons in salute, which is how gentlemen apologize for trying to remove each other from horses. So it went. Bout after bout, knights charging, lances breaking, skill and strength tested before all. Some were unhorsed to tumble in the dirt, helped up by laughing squires. Others held fast in their saddles and saluted with grace. Each pass was announced by the heralds, each victor awarded points by the judges, mathematics bravely keeping up with chaos. Between bouts, the field rang with music and laughter, children climbing the rail for a better look, until a beadle shooed them back with the gentle authority of a man who has seen small fingers and large horses in the same sentence. At midday, the Lord's banner was raised for the pause of dinner. The knights dismounted and retired to their pavilions. The crowd feasted on bread, cheese, pies, and roast meats. Musicians played lively tunes while jugglers tossed bright balls high against the sky. Gravity remained supportive. Merchants called their wares, ribbons in knightly colours, badges of each noble house, sweets and sugared almonds. The air was warm now, the morning mist burned away, leaving a clear sky and a scent of grass, and horse-like summer had decided to attend in full dress. In the afternoon came the final tilts, the great challenges between the highest-ranked knights. The crowd grew hushed with excitement as each pair rode out. Horses shone with brushed coats. Armour glittered where polished the sunlight, doing its part as unpaid publicity. Some knights prayed softly before mounting, touching charms or tokens from loved ones. The lord and lady watched closely, their faces intent, as champions thundered down the lists, every heartbeat an argument between bravery and probability. One match drew breathless silence. Sir Alaric of the castle's own guard against a visiting lord famed for his strength. They lowered lances, their pages stepping back. Trumpets sounded once, twice, and they charged. The impact was fierce. Both swayed but held their seats. A second pass, another clash, splinters flying. On the third, Sir Alaric struck true. His opponent reeled and fell, thudding to the earth with a crash that silenced all, no commentary needed. Then the crowd erupted, cheering and waving banners as Alaric circled, saluting both his foe and his lord. Etiquette triumphing, as usual, immediately after violence. When the last bout was done, the heralds proclaimed the victors. Prizes were brought forth, a golden circlet, a fine falcon, a purse of silver, none of which would mend a dented rib, but still nice. The lord presented them with solemn words. The lady tied ribbons to their arms, tokens of honour that also matched the pavilions beautifully. Cheers rolled across the field like thunder. Children waved pennants and clapped their wooden swords together in delight, blissfully confident they too would one day survive physics. As the sun lowered, the mood shifted toward feast and song. Knights retired to strip their heavy armour, rubbing weary shoulders and laughing over the day's hits and misses, the misses being funnier. The field emptied slowly as vendors packed their goods and peasants drifted back to their villages, chattering about the bouts they had seen. Pages loaded carts with broken lances and battered shields, today's glory, tomorrow's kindling and repairs. Only the carpenters lingered to tend the lists, pulling ropes and gathering fallen timbers, already thinking about the next miracle that won't fall over. By twilight the meadow lay quiet again, though trampled and littered with splinters. A few banners still hung limp in the cooling breeze. The pavilions were coming down one by one. Even spectacle must mind the tent pegs. From the castle came music, drifting faintly across the evening air. The victor's feast had begun in the great hall, bright with laughter and song. The tournament field, for all its glory, was but a stage. Its true tale now continued in the warmth of the castle above, where knives are mostly used to meet. When darkness fell, the last of the watchmen crossed the empty ground, lantern swinging. He paused once to look back at the rails and the wide, quiet meadow, imagining the roar and thunder that had filled it only hours ago, memory doing embroidery on fact. Then he climbed the hill to the Gatehouse, and the tournament field slept under stars, ready to wake again someday to the clash of lances and the cheer of the crowd, because history, like the herald, loves an encore. The great hall wakes like a stage before a play. Torches wait unlit, their resin-sweet heads wrapped in linen. Fresh boards ride trestles from door to dais. Hands test their steadiness, wedges tapped until the rattle stills. Someone shakes a tapestry and the woven deer leap again. Summer rivers flash, winter hounds give silent tongue. Servants sweep the rushes in long strokes and scatter sweet herbs, marjoram, meadowsweet, tansy, so the first footfalls bruise them into scent. The high windows hold a smeared pearl of morning. The hearth keeps last night's heart under ash, patient for the poker. In the kitchen yard, fires are kindled in shallow clay-lined pits. Spits crouch above them like little bridges, iron gleaming, chains ready to tick and whisper. The cook walks among her fires with a spoon that has ruled more hours than some lords, tapping, tasting, noting by nose what lesser minds would weigh. She tests a roast with pinch and glance, instructs a boy to baste as if rain must never quite reach the ground, and sets a girl to turning pies so their bottoms will be bold and not shy. A cauldron of cameline sauce leans towards simmer. Green sauce waits cool in the shade. A boy crushes pepper until the air pricks. The steward appears with his tablets and his measured calm. He counts platters and cups, lays pewter for common tables, reserves silver for the high board, and a single gilded ewer because the lady likes its weight. He lifts a goblet, finds the last cloud of tarnish, and rubs it clear with vinegar and salt. He marks trenchers cut from yesterday's loaves and sends a basket for more to the village bakehouse, 1 dozen for the hall, 6 for the almoner, 4 for the watch. He presses each knife to his thumb and chooses which will carve and which will serve. Carts arrive from garden and field. Greens drip crisp from a trough of river water. Carrots blaze like small torches. Onions crackle paper dry, their roots still tasting of soil. Leeks stand in ranks, white shins clean, green banners high. A honeycomb shines in a wooden frame, hexagon holding a small windowed summer. The gardener stands proud and lets others do the talking. His hands speak better, stained with sap and soil. Someone tips a basket of apples onto a cloth, and the hall fills with a remembered orchard. A boy from the river brings fish laid on wet moss, trout with constellations still on their skin, grayling like the underside of rain, a brace of eels coiling at the edge of patience. He names the pool where each was taken, and the alder that leans there. He accepts a heel of bread and a cup of small ale, and bows to the cook as if she were the river's sister. She hides a smile, cooks enjoy being honoured as kin to good water, and slips him a sprig of fennel to chew on the walk home. Inside the hall the trestles gain cloth, then bowls, then knives set blade inward out of respect. A sprig of green sits at each place. Not luxury, invitation. Candlesticks are placed down the long run like mileposts of light yet to be lit. Minstrels in the gallery tune quietly, seeking a key that to be heard while food is chewed. The drum tests a heartbeat's soft thrum. The steward tests a bench by sitting. The bench approves and keeps its counsel. A page chalks a discreet cross or a loose flagstone, so the serving line won't stumble it twice. The hearth finds its voice. Sparks leap like minnows. Logs settle to a geometry the spit boy understands. Roasts come in with a brief parade of steam, skins shining like lacquered dusk. Pies arrive with brave lids, vented with leaves and hearts. A seamstress of pastry seals a leek with 2 pinches and a kiss of egg. A cauldron of pottage, a whole weather of barley, carrots, leeks and bits of ham, settles on a sideboard where spoons learn the taste before bowls commit. Platters of fruit shine like a small orchard at harvest. A dish of nuts and salt waits for idle hands and talk. The hall smells like a farmer's pride dressed for court. The steward walks his river of table one last time. Salt is within reach. Mustard stands in lidded pots. Knives lie true. Napery is smooth. He marks a space for the alms dish. What goes there will go out. The postern after grace. He nods to the cupbearer, who measures the first wine into a tasting spoon and touches it to his own tongue for faith and safety. Guests arrive in waves, tenants in good boots with clean faces, neighbours who helped with hay, travellers caught by luck and told to stay, the reeve and his book, the miller smelling faintly of flour, the glover with hands like soft bark. High table gathers the household with room left for those who worked hardest this week, 2 dairymaids, a huntsman, the smith's eldest. The lord and lady enter last, not for pride but for pattern, and greet the kitchen with a bow before any other. The cook bows in return with flower on her sleeve and sovereignty in her gaze. Grace is spoken without argument. Bread is broken into as many hands as it can reach. The first loaf's heel goes to the almoner's dish. Bowls take the journey from pot to mouth, with the right sort of patience, the way a river chooses to carry silt. The hall settles into the music of eating, spoons tapping bowls, knives whispering through crusts, a murmur like bees who have agreed on the direction of a field. A child gasps quietly at the sweet bite of stewed pear, and no one shushes delight. Stories ride the steam. A man at the third table tells of a sheep who refused a bridge and saved 6 souls by insisting on another ford. He swears the wool was a map. The hall votes to believe the story, and that makes it true. The minstrel catches its shape and tucks it into a refrain for later. Talk arcs from weather to rumour to a strange pilgrim seen at the west gate, back to whether the black sow will farrow early. The steward watches for trouble and for hunger hiding behind shyness. He sees a woman who has outreached twice and arranges a plate of roast and greens to appear by her elbow as if the table itself had grown generous. He sees 2 boys nudge too hard and places between them a dish of pickles that demands cooperation. They pass it back and forth until their elbows learn truce. He angles a platter so the lame man at the aisle can carve without twisting. Quiet justice is the steward's art. Second courses roll like a soft tide, a rabbit pie singing thyme and juniper, roots roasted with honey until they shine, onions baked in their skins collapsing into sweetness, a custard that trembles and then stands brave, a bowl of berries with cream that looks like a cloud let down from its labour. There is a dish of peas for those who fast, and for the children a plate of apple fritters sugared at the last. Cups lift not for boasting but for thanks, to the field, the river, the fire, the hands. Between courses, small marvels. A salt cellar shaped like a ship glides the high table and returns with a tiny cargo of laughter. A page carries a warm hand basin and towel to the lady, and then to all who wish. Citrus peel in the water, extravagant scent like sun kept in a cupboard. A blind harper takes one tune to its end and folds another inside it. Feet under tables tap without malice. The Lord rises and thanks the fields by name, and the hands by number, and the ovens by temper. He names the bridge that was mended, the hedge that was laid, the child born, the illness survived. He invites a song of bridges, ferries, and roads that return people safely. The minstrel chooses a tune that keeps its feet on the floor, and everyone hums without meaning to. The lady adds a verse about a stepping stone hidden under snow, and the hall stores it away for next winter. A juggler shows his practice, 3 apples, 4 wooden balls, 1 bright egg that no one expects. He shapes a little storm and a little silence, and ends with the egg unbroken, returns it to the cook, who nods, because eggs belong to kitchens and not to tricks. The hall enjoys the lesson, and the cook pockets the egg for tomorrow's custard. Toward the end, a quiet is made for those who worked since before dawn. The steward sets a table near the door with the best of what remains, choice cuts, the deep gravy, the crispest root, the last custard spared. The kitchen crew enters with shy steps and full smiles, sleeves rolled, hair escaped from kerchiefs, hands scrubbed to pink. The hall rises as for a passing procession. They sit and eat with the satisfaction of tools that know they were used well, and the noise of pleasure is small but honest. Trenchers are gathered, bones go to a pail for broth, scraps go to a pail for pigs, crusts soaked in gravy go to the almoner's bag for the poor at the gate. The floor is swept and herbs scattered once more, so tomorrow will remember sweetness when the first foot crosses. The cupbearer rinses each goblet and upends it to dry. The knife boy oils the carving blades and wraps them in cloth. The steward checks the tally against his tablet and smiles at the rare good match between intention and outcome. The last light leaves the braziers, and the tapestries drink the shadows until the bore in the weaving looks like a hill again. The steward closes his book and thanks the bench again because gratitude wears well. The cook walks her fires, banks them with a practiced hand that can tell by sound when a coal is safe. She lifts the egg, the juggler returned, and sets it by tomorrow's cream. The last cup is washed and set upside down to dry, so dust will not own it. Night breathes through the empty hall, echoes roost on beams like birds that have flown enough. The hearth keeps a red eye open. Outside, the gate creaks once and settles. Inside, the tables remember elbows and laughter the way a field remembers feet. Tomorrow will bring another table, or another hunger harvest dinner, poor men's meal, a quiet nooning for travellers, but the hall is ready for both. Its boards have learned the grammar of plenty and of sharing, and its air keeps the tune that teaches hands to pass rather than hoard. Before the first bell of dawn rang across the courtyard, the castle kitchen was already awake. Its walls of thick stone held the night's chill like a memory, but inside, a dozen small fires glowed where embers had been banked beneath ash. The air was scented with smoke, yeast, and damp herbs. Faint light pushed through horn-paned windows still drowsy with frost. Soon this quiet hum would become a roaring, bustling heart of labour, but for now it stirred like some great creature waking, stretching its limbs in sparks and steam. A scullion crept in first, barefoot and silent, to rouse the embers. He carried a bellows patched with waxed leather and coaxed each heap of coals until shy tongues of flame licked upward. He fed them splinters and then faggots, building the long, patient heat a kitchen needs. Behind him came the undercooks, yawning into their sleeves, shrugging off cloaks and pulling on stained linen aprons burnished by years of grease and flour. Without a word they set about the morning, lifting black-bellied pots from hooks, hauling buckets from the courtyard pump, unwrapping loaves baked in the night's deep hours. The great hearth, wide enough to roast an ox, shivered into brightness as the first logs caught sparks, rose to the sooted vault like a brief swarm of fireflies. On the central boards, candlelight flickered over the day's first tasks. A boy sliced onions and leeks, his knife whispering against the grain. A girl bruised garlic and parsley in a heavy mortar, stone thudding with a steady, mothering rhythm. Barrels were pried open to reveal salt fish stowed in brine. Wheels of cheese were unbandaged, their rinds oiled and sound. Sacks of oats, barley, and einkorn were shouldered to the pottage cauldron that hung higher than a man's head on its iron chain. A pot of yesterday's broth stood to one side, its translucent fat cap lifted away, ready to feed today's gravy and soup. The chief cook entered then, tall and grave, a leather baldric slung with knives, skimmers, and tasting spoons. His arrival was quiet but commanding, talk folded down like a closed book as he crossed to the table. He lifted a ladle to taste the broth, nodded once, and the kitchen sprang wider into motion. Orders went out like measured drumbeats, trenchers to be cut for the household, porridge to be sweetened with honey for the Lord's board, eggs to be boiled soft for the ladies' breaking of fast, small beer brought from the buttery for the guards. He inspected herbs, tasting here, sniffing there, his face unreadable but keen. With 2 fingers he cast away a withered sprig, and with a thin smile he set aside a perfect bunch of marjoram for the evening's fish. From the outer rooms came the steady traffic of supply. The pantry boy trundled in cabbages tight as fists, carrots washed in yesterday's meltwater, parsnips, turnips, and a curly heap of kale still wearing the field's frost. From the buttery came small kegs of ale and slimmer casks of wine. From the larder, the breath of winter itself drifted in cold, iron-sweet haunches of venison, sides of boar, and a braided choir of sausages hung to dry. The dairymaid arrived with shallow pans of cream and a jug capped in linen. Last night's milk settled to curds under the hearth's sleepy heat. Knives sang against whetstones, sparks hopping like flea. The air grew warmer, fragrant, alive. Breakfast was the kitchen's first hard current. For the servants and guards, trencher slices of coarse rye, steaming bowls of pottage brightened with onion and a nut of butter, soft cheese, mugs of small ale. Houseboys bore the trays away at a trot, weaving past dogs with a practised knee. For the lord and lady, manchet bread white and fine, fresh butter rolled and stamped, soft-boiled eggs in pewter salts, pears stewed with cinnamon in a spoon of wine, thin ham shaved from last month's smoke. The cook himself nested these on a salver, fussing the last fig to a better angle, rasping a crust with sugar to glisten in the firelight before he nodded it away under a page's careful hands. When the morning board was cleared, the kitchen turned to its greater labours. The steward had sent word the hunt would return by noon. At night there would be a feast. That meant carcasses to dress and ovens to keep at a steady, sovereign heat. In the larder the boar hung, bled and stiff. 2 men worked the hide loose, one cutting, one pulling, the thick skin coming away like a door from its hinges. A haunch of venison was rubbed with salt and laid in a trough with wine, vinegar and herbs. A boy pricked holes for the marinade to run and laughed when the cook cuffed him for humming. On the feather-strewn bench the geese came clean under practised hands, soft white drifting down to cling to aprons and lashes. Pin feathers were singed to a sweet stink that rose and vanished in the smoke. One corner belonged to the bakehouse crew. Their brick ovens, already hot from the long night, breathed gentle dragon's breath. Dough lay in mellowed heaps, its surface blistered with tiny bubbles. The bakers turned and knocked it down, folded and rolled, shaped it into loaves with quick, tender palms. Long peels slipped the shaped bread into the glowing maw. A whisper, a hiss, and the fragrance of baking lifted like prayer. On the bench beside them pies took form, venison shoulder in a dark, juniper-scented gravy, boar and apple, eel with parsley and wine held in a coffin crust thick enough to travel. Sweet apple tarts for the high table, their tops pricked with little hearts. An apprentice brushed each lid with egg yolk, another pinched fluted edges and tucked a sprig of rosemary just so. Across the passage the pastry and sweetmeats bench ruled its own small kingdom. Almonds were ground to paste with a drizzle of rose water, pressed through cloth into white milk for custards. Honey warmed with walnuts and a whisper of ginger until it drew a thread from the testing nail. A boy with careful eyes weighed saffron stamens as if they were coins of the realm. Another scraped a nut of mace across a breadboard, releasing a scent that made old scullions sigh. Marchpane figures took shape under nimble fingers, birds, beasts, a tiny castle for the subtlety, painted with plant colours and glossed with sugar water that shone like ice. By midday the kitchen had become a weather of its own, a dry wind of heat from the main hearth, eddies of steam from cauldrons, sudden showers of sparks when a log was set down too hard, a thunder of cleavers, the rain-on-stone hiss of quenching. Knives flashed silver and went dark again, fish scales shone like coins then vanished under the blade. Herbs fell like confetti. Onions made boys tear and curse and laugh at one another's red eyes. Dogs pranced along the edges of this world, bold until a broom taught them sense. In the far corner a bellows boy kept the roasts fire to a steady tantrum, his cheeks as red as the coals. The huntsman came in a spatter of mud and triumph, carrying rabbits, pheasants, a brace of hare, and most prized, a red deer taken clean. The cook clapped the master of hounds on the shoulder. The steward counted under his breath. Then the work surged. Hares skinned quick as pulling off a glove, livers saved for the lord's pie, hearts set aside for the kennel master's fee. Birds plucked, drawn, rinsed in salted water. The stone floor turned slick. Scullions scattered ash and sand, then swept a path for the pastry cook to pass unblooded. Hounds elped and were rewarded only with bones too small to keep. Beyond spectacle lay the quiet necessities. Salt barrels were checked and rolled. The dairymaid poured cream into a shallow pan to clabber for cheese. The herb woman arrived from the kitchen garden with baskets of winter gifts, bay leaves, thyme, winter savoury, leeks that had slept under straw, a handful of sorrel daring the cold. She left also a clutch of remedies, comfrey for burns, fennel for the lady's cough, tansy to keep flies at bay when the weather turned, before melting back into chill air. As afternoon waned, the feast assembled itself like an army on the march. In the roasting hearth the boar turned on its iron spit, basted with wine and rosemary by a boy whose lashes were singed to little commas. A rack of venison ribs took on a lacquer of honey and pepper. Geese rotated in ordered ranks, their fat pinging softly in the pan below, saved like gold. Fish for the pious guests were gently poached with leeks, parsley, and slices of bitter orange conjured from the cellarer's secrets. On the back bar, sauces found their gloss, cameline thick with toasted bread and cinnamon for the red meats, green sauce pounded from parsley, sorrel and sage brightened with vinegar for fish, a pepper sauce dark as dusk for the boar. The cook tasted each with a bone spoon, eyes half closed, and adjusted as if listening to a choir and finding one voice sharp. Meanwhile, the kitchen met lesser needs, without pride, but with precision. A tray of light wafers and almond milk climbed to the lady's solar. A plain bowl well seasoned went to the chaplain, trencher and stew for the gatewatch. A rice pottage for the lord's elderly aunt who found meat hard to manage. The cook kept tally in his head, tapping his knife against the board when someone tried to claim twice. Between the main hearth and the bake ovens stood the scullery kingdom of hot water, sand, ash, and raw knuckles. Scullions sluiced platters, scrubbed pots black to a sullen shine, scoured knives with pumice, and set them to dry in ordered rows. Buckets steamed, benches dripped. Their corner smelled of lye and mist. The head scullion, a woman with arms like braided rope, ruled it with a stare sharper than any blade. The steward's bell rang from the screen's passage. The high table was set. The mood tightened like a drawn bow. Platters took their places on the staging boards. Boar with an apple grinning in its jaws. Venison carved in fans. Whole trout glazed with an eye of oil. Pigeons in pastry. Cabbages chopped and buttered. Carrots glossed with honey. Trenchers stacked like coins. The subtlety stood ready. A marchpane castle with banners of candied peel. A peacock roasted and redressed in its own jewel-feathered skin, head lifted proud, gilded beak gleaming. Pages and footmen crowded the door to the great hall, faces bright, fingers itching to be swift and sure. The cook moved along the line like a general, adding a last sprig, reslicing here, tilting there, setting a carving mark to ease the knife. He glanced once to the steward. The steward nodded. The procession began. Dish after dish went forth under the rush of warm air from the hall's fires, music and talk already rising. The door swallowed the gleam of meat and the sheen of sauces. The kitchen stood for a breath in the sudden, ringing quiet left behind. Then the second labour, keeping the tide even. Platters were readied to replace what the hall devoured. Sauces warmed at the edge of the coals. Pasties mended where a careless thumb had dented crust. The small staff meal, thick pottage of barley and pork, heel of bread, a mug of ale, was swallowed standing. Laughter flared, quick and nervous, as they guessed which lord would praise, which would complain, who would spill, who would sing, The cook allowed it for a little while and then lifted his chin. The kitchen flowed back to work as if he had tugged a rope. At length the sweet course was called, and with it the hush of hope even among the weary. Custards trembled in their dishes, wafers snapped clean, comfits rattled into silver bowls, marchpane figures went out to be admired and devoured. The cook watched the doorway until the last sugar gleam vanished. Only then did his shoulders ease. After the feast the world returned in pieces, platters with bones, trenchers soaked with gravy, shells, fish spines like combs, pastry coffins gnawed to edges. Waste was sorted with a thrift older than the castle, bones boiled for tomorrow's stock, fats saved for soap and lamps, bread for the pigs, sound leftovers for the almoner to distribute at the gate come morning. Dogs were given their due, not a scrap more. The floor was sanded and swept, rushes changed where grease had fallen. Buckets of hot water marched to and fro until the stones steamed like a riverbank in summer. Fires sank to a disciplined glow. The chief cook made his last round. Knives counted and sheathed. Spices sealed in their boxes and locked in the pantry chest. The tally scratched with iron gall on a board, bore half, venison quarter, oranges 2, saffron weighed, almonds low. He spared a nod for the bellows boy asleep on a sack, cheeks smudged, mouth open like a fledgling's. Beyond the kitchen, the castle softened into sleep-song dwindling, boots thumping off toward chambers, the courtyard settling under stars. In the kitchen, the last pot hissed itself dry and was pulled aside. A single boy remained to tend the banked hearth, to knock ash over the heart of red, to leave one narrow door latch set just so for the dawn scullion's hand. The room smelled of wood ash and cooling bread and a fatigue as sweet as honey. When the first bell of dawn rang across the courtyard again, the kitchen would wake without mercy or fuss. Fires teased back to life, dough knocked down, knives whetted, orders called. This was the unseen covenant of the house, that warmth, labour, and cleverness below stairs would rise as splendour above. Here, in smoke and steam, in salt and sweetness, the castle's strength was made daily, one trencher, one laddered, one shining platter at a time.